There was a terrible storm. The sky was filled with strange blue lightning and black clouds. Crows and large birds were flying around creating havoc. One of these large birds with mighty wings perched on a tombstone, and behind could be seen the blazing city. Her eyes reflected the horror of what was happening ahead. It was raining and on the wet ground lay a pile of corpses, water mixed with spilled blood. The sight was simply horrifying. The man coughed up a lot of blood. A tired, massive bald man with a couple of scars on his face said that they, the Valley of Ghost Smoke, had always helped ordinary citizens fight injustice by killing only those who deserved it. He was already covered in sweat, but not from fear. Xiao Jianming stood in front of him. He looked like a raven. He had long black hair and black clothes, wearing a big black hat with a veil on his head. The man said that as a cultivator, Xiao Jianming should be responsible for helping ordinary people in the society. He asked why he was helping these corrupt officials to destroy their valley. Xiao Jian had blue eyes and a golden mark on his forehead. He replied that the man was wrong. He revealed that he didn't care at all about what they were doing here. The man took one last look at his opponent. At that time, Xiao Jianming swung his sword and the man lost his life. His smeared blood was left on the parquet. It was pouring rain, the blood electrifying on Xiao Jian's sword. He looked up. Only his hat protected him from the water. He told himself he was only following the law of the jungle. Xiao Jian stood on a tall tree and looked at the valley. Behind him were crows and birds that guarded the corpses of people. It was a clear morning. A beautiful city could be seen ahead, a sect of formidable sky. There was a crowd of people on the street. Most turned around at the shouts of the kid who was asking Sir to accept him into the sect. It was the little surviving boy. He was hugging the legs of a well-fed man, crying and screaming that he was once from a wealthy family, but all 300 of them had been brutally murdered by a despicable man. The man tried his best to throw the boy off his leg, and he kept saying that being the only survivor, he weak and alone, had to wander around the gangster's neighborhood. The boy looked at the man with unhappy, tearful eyes and told him that when he heard that he was from such a powerful sect, he prayed and followed the man, saying that he only wanted to find a master and become stronger, and if he took him, he would. The man didn't let him finish. He asked if he had a letter of recommendation. Uncle and letter have the same pronunciation in Chinese, so the boy replied that he didn't have an uncle. The man thought he was an ignorant brat. The fat man asked if he could offer some treasure. The boy tugged at his sleeves and suggested to the man that he give him some. Then the boy climbed on his neck. The man asked him if he had any special abilities. He said he could eat. Then the man decided that he was a useless pig who came here to eat. He did pull the boy down by the scruff of his neck and asked if he realized where he was. The boy smiled widely and asked, "Wasn't this the formidable Sky Sect?" The man was surprised at what he turned out to know after all. He revealed that the formidable Sky Sect had existed in the Chu Kingdom for 3,000 years, was highly respected and had a powerful foundation. Said that every sect member was an expert. They were all strong warriors. And just recently, senior brother Xiao had single-handedly wiped out all the bandits of Ghost Smoke Valley. He had killed 9 of the 10 great bandits. Now he was also angrily looking at the little boy and saying that since he didn't have a letter of recommendation, then he was just scum. Said that he didn't have any treasure, so he was also poor. After all, he was just trash without much ability. Then he kicked the boy hard and he flew far to the side. The man yelled that this was the sect of the menacing sky. They don't do charity and they wouldn't accept a useless piece of shit like him. Yelling for the scum to fuck off, the boy fell painfully to the ground, hitting his head. The locals looked at him with disgust, saying that this guy really dared to try. One man said that this scum would never be accepted into the sect. The boy got up and walked away, hissing that the man was a stupid fat pig. This made the man terribly angry, but he had hopes that he had heard what he had heard, and so he asked the boy what he had just said. The boy turned around confidently and replied clearly, telling him he was a stupid fat pig. He pointed his finger at the man and told him not to dare to lecture him with his pig snout. This horribly offended and left the man in shock, asking how dare he. Then the boy poked him with a FAQ and shouted that all was right, called him a pig's head, said that they should be honored to accept him into their sect, shouted that today they had acted very ignorantly, and therefore one day he would come and burn the main temple of their stupid sect to the ground. After those words the man had no desire or willpower left to hold himself together. He was all of himself with rage. He screamed that he was a petty bastard and asked if he really wanted to die. The huge man rushed toward the little boy, making his way through the surprised crowd. He yelled that he was a fucking bastard too fast, because of his physique. The man ran quite a bit and soon stopped. He thought that the kid must be a donkey because only donkeys can run that fast. The boy stuck out his tongue and called the man a stupid fat pig again, telling him to catch him if he could, of course. It made the man angrier and angrier. He shouted that if anyone caught him and brought him to him, he would register him without a line. This amazed the boy. He wondered if this old prick couldn't play fair. He was shaking with fear and thinking about the fact that this stupid fat pig had pulled such a dirty trick. Without wasting a minute, people rushed at the boy. Some shouted that they had caught him. Some said they were the first. The boy shouted that they were going to strangle him. There were just an incredible number of people. One guy in the crowd yelled out that the brat had escaped. The boy smiled widely and shouted that he would be the first to leave, and they, the guys, would have to wait in line. He ran very fast and still had time to make faces, but his happiness was not long. Suddenly, someone grabbed his leg. This really surprised the kid and he was already flying to the ground. He was caught by a long-haired guy in a yellow outfit. He had lifted the rampaging little boy by his leg and now he was dangling head down. The guy said he knew a few weak moves but not enough. The well-fed man was already flying toward him and cheerfully thanking his brother. The guy replied to the older brother, the man, that he was too polite. Then he introduced himself as Ho Ching and said that he only needed his fingertips to catch this cute monkey, and therefore there was no need for gratitude. The man rubbed his palms together and said that was fine. He should teach the creep a lesson first, and then he will guide Ho Ching to register. The man angrily looked at the boy and told him that he was an outer disciple of the formidable Sky sect, asking how this brat dared to insult him, saying that even if he couldn't kill him today, he would teach him a lesson that he would remember for the rest of his life. Suddenly someone shouted for the man not to touch her young master. It was a little girl. She flew towards them and screamed that she wouldn't let them. The boy's eyes went wide. On the way, the girl tripped and fell right on her face. The baby hurriedly sat up. She had no time for crying or whining now. She tried to cover the boy with herself. The boy called her Xiaoman, asking why she came if he told her to hide. The girl was wearing strange clothes, but she was very cute. She didn't have green eyes and red wavy hair. She said she wouldn't let him hurt her young master. She had a ponytail sticking out from under her skirt. The man asked if it was a savage, and if a poor man like the boy had a savage in his charge. Ho Ching shook the boy. While he shouted to Xiaoman that her young master was much stronger than he looked and he didn't need her help, he shouted for her to get out of here. Immediately, tears appeared in the girl's eyes. She said that if she hadn't come, he would have been hit already. Ho Ching smiled sneakily. He kicked the little girl hard with his foot and screamed that the mixture of human and animal was just disgusting scum. Xiaoman fell to the ground and a large pool of her blood formed around her. The little boy screamed that he swore he would kill him. Ho Ching replied that he would wait. The locals gathered around Xiaoman. Someone yelled for the others to look at the ground. Beautiful green grass was growing out of the pool of blood. People were amazed that it was sprouting. Suddenly, a huge, thick tree appeared there. Everyone, especially the well-fed man, realized that it was the bloodline of the tree elementals. This savage slave possessed a rare bloodline that all sects were fighting over. Many big white birds arrived. On one of them stood a beautiful girl with long blue hair. People noticed her and looked at her in surprise. The man immediately fell to his knees at the sight of her, and as Yusan Liang's outer teachings, he greeted senior sister Lingyun. The girl stepped carefully onto the ground. She got off the big bird and headed towards Yusan Liang. On the way, she collected some of Xiaoman's blood. It wriggled against her hand. Lingyun looked at the blood carefully. Then she lifted the little girl into her arms. She ordered Yusan Liang to put her name on the list of incoming students. The man obeyed. Despite her grave condition, Xiaoman asked that young master Fan Xing not be beaten. Lingyun then asked which one of them was Fan Xing. Fan Xing wriggled in Ho Ching's arms and shouted for him to let him go. In the end, Ho Ching did so with an extremely dissatisfied face. Fan Xing deftly lands a nice leg kick. He shouted that he was young master Fan Xing, asking for his girl back. Lingyun replied that from now on and forever, she was no longer his. She threw him some blue bottle. Fan Xing silently caught her. Yusan Liang realized that these were innate violet chi pills. It shocked him terribly. Others asked if it was a spiritual elixir that would help the slave to remove his status. Some said they were sure of it. They were amazed that such a thing had been given to a beggar. They cried out that it was too much. Fan Xing looked at the bottle. Then he seriously said he didn't need a spiritual elixir. This statement surprised Lingyun and she turned around. Fan Xing shouted that if they didn't accept him into the sect as well. Lingyun watched him carefully, then turned back around and told them to add him too. But he had a normal talent, so Yusan Liang could do as he wished. She flew away on her bird along with Xiaoman. Everyone looked after her. Yusan Liang poured cold sweat and told her that he would follow her instructions. Everything was ready. Someone was shouting to someone that they were here. There was an incredible view of the field and the forest and one cabin. There were questions coming from the lodge as to what the heck this place was all about. Fan Xing was thrown inside. Fan Xing sat down on the floor and asked if this was really the formidable sky sect. Yu Sangliang shouted that he was an ignorant idiot and this was the herb garden of the formidable sky sect. Fan Xing asked what other herb garden and didn't he become a sect Yalan? What was he brought here for back then? Yu Sanliang replied that of course it was to tend the garden, where else would the disciple get spiritual herbs for his cultivation? Fan Xing shouted, does he really mean to say that he is here for the sake of becoming a laborer? The man reached up his sleeve and told me that many are fighting for the job. He threw out a garment, a book and a tablet from his sleeve, told the boy to take it. Fan Xing caught the garment and the book flew to the floor. Fan Xing took it all and asked what this little book was. Yu Sanliang revealed that this was the formidable Sky Sect's chi book that everyone strived to obtain when entering this job. Fan Xing threw it out and asked what it was and what it was for. The man shouted that it was the secret of their formidable Sky Sect. No one from outside could access it. He was telling the boy that he would achieve the first spirit movement and could become an official disciple of the formidable Sky Sect if he took his cultivation seriously, practicing from this very book. Yu Sanliang couldn't help but add that with his talent, it would be extremely difficult. Fan Xing then went to fetch the discarded book. The man walked out the door and told Fan Xing to ask his older brothers if he didn't understand something. The door slammed shut behind him. Yu Sanliang angrily and quietly said to himself that they would definitely be kind enough to guide him. A sneaky smile appeared on his face. Fan Xing concentrated and closed his eyes. He sat on the dais and read a book, telling himself that he was not good at all, asking if Yu Sanliang was right and he really had no talent. He laid back and said that bitch cheated him. She said he could be an apprentice but in the end they just made a laborer out of him. He thought she was just bullying honest people. The sun was shining through his fingers and he thought to hell with becoming an apprentice. Having reached the first step, he wasn't sure he could reach it in a lifetime. He's also not sure if this cultivation thing will help him, but it looks like a whole lot of high ranking. He wondered why Ninth Uncle didn't say what it was when he gave it to him. He held the book in his hands. Then Fan Xing noticed something and it interested him. He sat down and asked himself what it was. Something surprised him far more. A bright yellow light appeared. It enveloped the boy. Moreover, it was pouring out of Fan Xing. His eyes rolled back behind his eyelids. He didn't realize what was happening. Everything around him was golden. Then he came to his senses a little and his eyes went back to where they belonged. He looked up and wondered what it was. The light penetrated him. The book of creating formidable heavenly chi is suitable for people who are in the spiritual stages, as it is a guide for novice cultivators. The spiritual stage is the first stage of spiritual development. Each stage has different levels. The spiritual stage includes 9 levels. After passing these levels, the cultivator moves on to the next stage. Deeper light poured into Fan Xing's core. Fan Xing realized that this was chi energy. He was lifted aloft, a gust undermining his hair. Pupils rolled back again somewhere else. Suddenly, water appeared from somewhere and fell on Fan Xing's forehead. The light had dissipated and now the boy was flying back to the ground. Fan Xing painfully fell to the spot where he was sitting earlier. He looked at his hands and was horrified that apparently a book had gotten into his head. He sat down and thought that this might be a first-class book. After all, not only had he sensed chi, cultivation methods had also gotten into his head. The badge fell out of his clothes. It flew down, with Fan Xing's name written on it. Fan Xing bent down to pick him up. Suddenly, someone prevented him from doing so by stepping on a piece of wood. They were some grown-up weird guys. One was very tall, one was pumped up, one was low and fat, and the fourth was hiding behind the back of the second. The other looked at Fan Xing and thought that he was the brat who had pissed off the manager. He saw that he was still very young, but he decided that it didn't matter. He just needed to carry out the order and teach him a good lesson. Fan Xing pointed his finger and said as he stood on his plaque. The guy grabbed the boy by the scruff of the neck and lifted him up. He leaned over to Fan Xing and told him to listen here, for he would only say once. He was telling the little guy not to dare to explain himself to him. The other 3 shouted that the boss was right. Fan Xing then realized that they were here to bully him and said so. The boss asked what if it was. Fan Xing had tears in his eyes, asking if he wanted to hit him, saying he would call for help. At first, the boss was surprised, and then all 4 of them laughed loudly, and the boss shouted that the boy should try it, saying there was no one else here, so he could at least tear his throat out screaming. Fan Xing blurted out. He was almost hysterical, begging them not to hit him. He was almost hysterical, begging them not to hit him. The boss threw Fan Xing. The 4th guy told the little guy not to worry because they would make sure to train him properly. The boss talked about how spineless Fan Xing was. Fan Xing realized that he had only sensed the qi, hence he needed more time to cultivate it. For now it would be better to just follow their orders. The three guys were courting the boss, while Fan Xing was working hard in the fields. There was a huge pile of dirty, sweaty clothes. Fan Xing was going to have to wash it all by hand. Even the fourth guy covered his nose from such a horrible smell. Poor Fan Xing worked hard, chopping wood, while the four guys were eating deliciously with beautiful dishes at the table. Fan Xing had one unfortunate broken plate of something incomprehensible. He also didn't have enough room at the table. Fan Xing was up to something. He glanced at the guys and smiled evilly. Night had fallen, with a full moon floating in the sky. The only source of light was a candle. Fan Xing held it in his hands. He quietly got up while everyone was sleeping. Fan Xing was terribly pleased. He knew that it was getting dark and it was time to shut these dogs up, to beat them up. He used the Chinese idiom talking about blocking the enemy's escape route and then destroying them. Fan Xing patted the sleeping boss' cheeks and called out to him. The boss turned over and, without opening his eyes, asked through his sleep what kind of crazy people are looking for death in the middle of the night. At that time, Fan Xing took out a knife and swung it at the boss. The one opened his eyes sharply and wide. However, it was too late. There was such a loud scream from the house that even the squirrel in the tree was almost deafened. Another candle was lit. It was in the hands of the fourth guy. What he saw in the light struck him to the core and frightened him. The other two were also indescribably horrified when they saw Fan Xing and the boss with blood pouring out of him, and he called Fan Xing a petty bastard. Fan Xing's knife was covered in the boss's blood, and he noticed that the boss was still able to talk and said that he seemed to have missed. The boss sprang to his feet and ran at Fan Xing, wishing him dead. Fan Xing was completely calm and confident. He activated his spiritual energy and it stunned the three young men. Fan Xing immediately dodged the boss's first attack. His fist. The boss spat on the floor. Fan Xing stood on his back. He looked terribly intimidating and swung his knife at the boss again. First, Fan Xing stabbed the knife into the boss's butt. The boss was terrified and screamed loudly in pain. The boss had tears streaming down his face and his eyes bulging, and Fan Xing told the lowlife to keep screaming. No one would help him, so he could at least scream. All three of them had long since shat themselves with fear. Each of them had wet pants. Fan Xing wiped the knife clean of blood. He stood victoriously on his boss's body. He asked to be forgiven for making too much noise and waking up his older brothers. The three guys were sobbing and screaming that it was all because of the boss. He ordered them to bully Fan Xing, asking them to let them go, saying that they were blind and ignorant, telling them that they were just pathetic shrimps. Just don't pay any attention to them. Fan Xing laughed and agreed. For everyone, this night would be an unforgettable night. It was morning, the sun had yet to rise all the way, and the guys were already hard at work. Only Fan Xing was sitting under the umbrella and watching them. Even the former boss, though on crutches, was working and telling the others to speed up as well. Fan Xing sat in the previous boss's seat inside. He watched them work hard. Then the former boss told Boss Fan that all the herbs had already been gathered. He saw the empty basket and was stunned to see that Boss Fan had already used everything. Fan Xing was reading his book and asked the guys how far they had progressed in this formidable skybook. Everyone paid a lot of attention to the question. The second guy told Fan that he had been cultivating according to this book every day for 6 years, but had never been able to feel the qi. Told that others only cultivated for 3 years, so it was even worse, saying that among the tens of thousands of laborers like them, only a few become disciples by following this method. He extended his thumb forward and said that people like Boss Fan are only 1 in 1,000. Not even that, 1 in 10,000. This satisfied Fan Xing and he said that they could go wash his clothes. The former boss asked to leave it to him. Fan Xing read the book and pondered that the herbs should already be enough, so why there was still no breakthrough. He wondered what the problem was. The former boss was like a dog, running after Fan Xing and grooming him. Now he brought him a drink. Yusan Liang stood on the cliff and watched the scene. He was out of his mind with anger. The man wiped his eyes, looked again. He asked if this was an illusion. Yusan Liang just couldn't believe his eyes. He asked how this bastard had gotten to the point of commanding Wang Ji as he pleased now. A small scene. Yusan Liang looked terrifying and even frantic. Someone who was filming him stopped the tape and shouted, "Cut." Yu Xianglan was sitting in a special background, only he was not wearing a traditional garment, but shorts that gave a good view of the man's hairy legs. Yu Liang became the cutest creature and asked the director how he was doing, if he was doing well. The director replied that the expression on the man's face was so vulgar, it was even creepy. Meanwhile, from behind Fan Xing was spinning tricks. The director was a young guy with glasses. He asked Yu Sangliang if he thought he was a good actor. Yu Sanliang blurted out a smile and asked how could it be otherwise. This kind of answer didn't really please the principal. He remained silent. Then Yu Sangliang felt a little embarrassed and promised that he would be in shape by next Monday, asking if he could give him some plot. The director had nothing to present to the actor. He chimed in that they would see if the audience would put likes, write comments and join their channel. Now Wang Ji was working in the water body. When Wang Ji once again bent over to get some grass, he bumped into someone's foot. He was already starting to ask which fucker wanted to die, and then he stopped abruptly and went into shock. All because it was Yu Sangliang's shoe. He looked at Wang Ji silently. The other three came closer and all four of them bowed in front of the man. Wang Ji told the manager that he was sorry. Yu Sanliang asked Wang Zi where that bastard was. Wang Zi was shaking with fear and terror. He replied that boss fam, then abruptly corrected himself to that bastard, and said that he was still asleep in his room. Yu Sanlan said he told them to make his life hell, asked if this was what they thought hell looked like. He threatened Wang Zi with a sword. Thoth moved closer and sat on his knees. Now he was hugging the manager's leg and talking about how he was useless and the bastard was too cruel, asking him to look at his leg, saying that if he didn't obey him, he would lose it altogether. Yu Sanliang punched the guy in the face and called him useless trash, telling him to just not say that he couldn't even hit him. Wang Zi cried and told the manager that this bastard had spiritual energy, screaming that they couldn't even get close to him. The news of spiritual energy startled Yu Sanliang and he asked if they were sure. The tall guy replied that yes, and they had seen it with their own eyes. The others nodded approvingly. Yu Sanliang fell silent and thought for a moment. Then he ordered them to take him to Fan Xing, and they took Wang Zi under their arms and agreed. Yu Sanliang smiled fearfully and ordered them to also go to the field and bring him some herbs. Wang Zi then replied to manager Yu that gathering herbs without permission is a serious offense. Yu Sanliang shouted for them to do as he says. He said that he has his own methods. The boys had to agree again. Fan Xing was practicing in his chambers. He silently sat in the lotus posture with his eyes closed. Then he opened them and thought about the fact that he still couldn't break through to the first level of the spiritual stage. Suddenly, the doors swung open and a lot of wind blew into the room. The guys and the manager walked in. Yu Sanliang asked Fan Xing how dare he break the law and gather herbs without permission. He threw a basket full of grass to him and said that he had been caught red-handed, asked what he had to say for himself. Fan Xing looked at the basket. Then he looked up and asked his hogshead if he was trying to set him up. Yu Sanliang asked what of it. After all, he is the manager of this grass field, saying that if he went to the administration with him, he would so-and-so make sure that he would be given a milder punishment. But if he resisted, he shouldn't be blamed for using force later. Fan Xing activated spiritual energy and told the pig that he was not as helpless as before. Sangliang shouted for the brat to not be so smug just because he had managed to develop spiritual energy. Yu Sangliang actually didn't expect that this brat could actually develop spiritual energy. He knew that it had barely been more than 10 days and his progress was already alarming. Fan Xing thought about this fat pig being an outer disciple. At least he is at the first level of the spiritual stage. The man clearly has more spiritual energy than him. He realized he needed to get close to him before he exhausted all his spiritual energy. Fan Xing flew at Yu Sanliang. He tried to kick at it, but ended up hitting it with his sword. Yu Sanliang was astonished by such strength. He asked what it was. Fan Xing spun around. Now he was preparing to strike with his other foot. Yu Sanliang manages to block a jab and avoid getting hit with a forehead kick. However, his arm broke. It was nightmarishly painful. The poor man's eyes turned blue. Then Fan Xing whirled backwards. He stood on his feet exactly a couple meters away from the man. His golden energy flew around the boy like smoke. Yu Sangliang thought that this brat knew how to strengthen his body with spiritual energy. No wonder it was painful. Yu Sanliang turned around and shouted for the four guys to get out of here. The boys didn't mind at all, and so immediately ran out of the room. Then the manager pulled out some swords. He held his arm and shouted that the bastard had broken his arm. Magical swords flew toward the boy. All of them changed direction abruptly, and now flew at him not from the side, but from above. In response, Fan Xing folded his hands into a special sign. After that, folded them differently, in the pose of some kind of prayer. Then a protective field appeared over him. Fan Xing looked around and wondered what it was. Yu Sanliang said that it was a sword array that could only be used when reaching the first level of the spiritual stage. Said that Fan Xing wouldn't be able to escape with his current level. Then admitted that he didn't expect him to really develop his spiritual energy, but now it would be over. Fan Xing struggled to break through the field built around him. He got tired and fell down. The field also disappeared and swords started falling around him. Yu Sanliang laughed and asked how he could do such a thing, saying that if he bowed down and submitted to him. Fan Xing didn't let him finish and shouted for this dick pig to only dream of such a thing. Yu Sanliang got even angrier and shouted that he would kill him. At that time, 6 swords flew at once at the protagonist. They cut through the air swiftly. First one batch, then another. The swords were sharp, and therefore had almost no resistance with the air. It was almost impossible to trace them. Everything around it was glowing blue. Fan Xing changed locations lightning fast and chaotically. Yu Sangliano was angry at how naive this was. Something scared the boy. In his eyes was the manager Yu Sangliang. Ahead was a black and scary city. The protagonist wondered if he was dead. There was a full moon, but the clouds were gray, like thick smoke after a fire. A well-fed man was addressing the idle peasants, asking them if they thought they wouldn't have to pay taxes just because there was a disaster this year. A small man was sitting on the ground in front of him, and a sack of scattered grain was lying next to him. The man said it would only happen in their dreams, said that even if they starved to death they would still have to pay taxes in full. The people there lived miserable and hungry. The man was told that this brat's parents died because they refused to pay taxes, and this little thing even dared to hide food from them. A well-fed and not nice man shouted that today he would show them what would happen if they didn't pay their taxes. The man clearly enjoyed bullying poor people. He swung his sword at the boy, then the blade sliced through the air. Tears appeared on the little boy's face and he closed his eyes. Then he felt something liquid splash against his hair. He opened his eyes in astonishment. Fan Xing was in front of him, and the man who wanted to cut off the boy's head was left without a hand. He grabbed the remains of his arm and screamed loudly in terrible pain. His escorts shouted that the bandits of Ghost Smoke Valley were here. The bandits were already flying towards the people. Fan Xing asked the boy he saved why he was on his knees. A battle was going on behind him. The boy sat with his mouth open. He told what he had heard about them, about the Valley of Ghost Smoke, asked if they were going to kill them. Fan Xing replied to him that they never kill innocent people, saying that they only kill corrupt officials and merchants. It amazed the boy, and also encouraged. He asked if he could join them, yelling that he wanted to avenge his parents. Fan Xing replied that not yet, because he was too young, but he could find them when he got older. He ran off to help the rest of the bandits. The savior's reply shocked the boy even more. In his hands was a poster of the 10th bandit Zhang Maji. There was a scary adult man, with a strange beard and ponytails. His eyes were scattered, sharp teeth and crooked ears. His nose was like a pig's. The man who held this masterpiece in his hands burst out laughing. It was a bald bandit. He was having fun and shouted to the others to browse, saying that it was a wanted ad and now he was famous. The 10th bandit was Fan Xing, and he, unlike the others, was not having fun. The bald man laughed and said, "This picture is a bit wrong." Fan Xing tried to take the paper away and asked his uncle not to mock him. The gangsters laughed that the little boss was upset. Of course they did it all in jest. One of them told the little boss that even they didn't have wanted posters, saying that he was now their official mascot. The bald scarred man stroked Fan Xing's head and said that it meant that he had contributed a lot to this raid. A man with a weird haircut and a tattoo on his temple said that's right. And this kid was so cool when he jumped on the officer's dog and killed it. They decided to celebrate and drink to it. Everyone supported him and also supported the little boss. Large blocks of rocks flew downward. The bald man was clearly frightened. He kicked the door to the room and people inside fell in. Everything was in smoke. The bandits asked what happened, if the officials were taking revenge. Someone stepped inside. It was Xiao Jianming. The bandits were amazed that only one man had done all this. The bald man with scars swore and said that he might be a cultivator. He ordered everyone to move back, and Fan Xing was also there. One guy asked if it meant that cultivators really existed, and another guy with a strange hairstyle asked why a cultivator had come to their valley. The bald man asked Xiao Jian if he could find out what he needed in their Ghost Smoke Valley. Xiao Jian counted out loud, counting to 305. Then saying that it looked like everyone was in. He held his mighty sword in his hand. The bald man realized things were bad and ordered him to stop faster. Something surprised him greatly. It was because Xiao Jianming had scattered everyone who was about to attack him with a single body movement. Then he thrust his sword into the floor and a crack formed there. He was absolutely confident in himself and his abilities, but it was there for a reason. Flashes of bright light were flying all over the estate. The bald man called out to Fan Xing, who was squatting and holding his head. Fan Xing asked his uncle if he was okay. The uncle didn't answer anything, but told Fan Xing to listen to him carefully. He told the little guy to hide and wait for him to leave, and later head to the 4th tree at the entrance of the valley. There was something buried for him there. He stood up and said that this would be a book to cherish. He said that Fan Xing should live. when his uncle left for certain death. Fan Xing was left sitting behind a rock. He cried silently. The bald man told Xiao Jian that Ghost Lady Valley had always protected the ordinary residents from killing those who deserved to die, saying that as a cultivator, he should protect the people. So why was he working for these corrupt officials? Fan Xing heard Xiao Jian reply to his uncle that he was deluded, as he said that he never cared what they were doing here. The protagonist covered his mouth with his hand, his whole body trembling with terror. Then Xiao Jianning killed his uncle. In the end, he said that the strong will always prey on the weak. Fan Xing understood perfectly well that he was right. The protagonist decided that he should have figured it out himself. He remembered how happy they had been when they killed the bird and realized it was peace. He remembered the dead head of a bird that was definitely defenseless next to them. Fan Xing knew that this was a world where the strong preyed on the weak. He sat beside the corpses of his family and the birds that had already come to eat. His face was indifferent and blank, but there were tears streaming from his eyes and the blood of his brothers on his cheeks. Yu Sanliang attacked Fan Xing with flying swords. They all flew at one little boy. One of them was already quite near the protagonist's eye. Then there was a horrible explosion. Yu Sanliang was screaming about how strong this little bastard was. Suddenly, he was very shocked by something, his mouth wide open. The reason for his surprise was Fan Xing. The swords didn't hurt him. He deftly caught the sword that flew at his eye. Yu Sanliang realized that this freak's spiritual energy could rival the sword formation. It annoyed him terribly much. He wondered if he had burned his meridians. He was so amazed because it was self-destructive refinement. Fan Xing didn't feel too good. His hand was covered in blood. His mouth was also leaking it. The knowledge of the book appeared in his mind. His brain and core chi seemed to be burning. Fan Xing knew that the power was not burning but increasing. He wondered if it was all because of the yin-yang demon and God's mirror. The sword in Fan Xing's hands began to crack and break. Now Yu Sanliang was lying on the floor and asking himself, how did this bastard break through? Then the protagonist swirled in his spiritual energy. He swiftly dashed to Yu Sanliang's feet. It annoyed him a lot. Next, he noticed Fan Xing at his feet. He was rapidly flying somewhere. Fan Xing stopped right beside Yu Sanliang. His fist raced towards the man's head. Yu Sanliang's face met Fan Xing's small but strong fist. The blow was so strong that the man was thrown far back, knocking out a tooth and breaking his nose. Now a stream of blood was flowing from there. Fan Xing had a strange feeling. He felt like he had reached the first level of spiritual shift. Yu Sanliang was now lying on the floor and didn't even try to attack or defend himself. The four guys looked into the room and were shocked. They were all sweating with terror. Night had fallen, and a full and large moon was visible in the sky. The guy who used to be the boss was holding a huge-sized piece of meat. He called Fan Xing the boss and cheerfully informed him that the munchies were ready. They were all sitting around the fire and Yu Sanliang was lying beaten on the floor. Then Fan Xing paid attention to him again and asked the elder pig, so what was he trying to accomplish? Did he only want to teach a lesson? Yu Sanliang was awake. He hurriedly replied to Junior Fan that it was like this. He said, otherwise he wouldn't use the wooden sword, and so he just wanted to let off steam, saying that he wasn't as brave as him and had never killed people. Fan Xing turned away from him and called out to someone. Then Yu Sanliang tied up lying on the cold ground. The two boys began to untie the tight ropes on the older man's body. Not a small job, but they managed. Yu Sanliang was finally untied and free. Then he told Fan Xing that frankly, he was now fully convinced of his abilities, saying that he had been looking after the medicinal field for so many years, but he had yet to see anyone who could break through to the first level of spiritual shift so quickly. Fan Xing replied with a question. He asked, didn't he had mattered to him not long ago? He said that he was not petty, and by beating him, they were even. Yu Sanliang bowed to the protagonist and said that his cultivation had reached the first level, saying that tomorrow he would need luck to ring the pure heart bell and obtain the status of an outer disciple. He revealed that he wanted to congratulate the promotion in advance. After these words of the man, the boy smiled broadly and replied that he accepted his kind words and promised to ring the bell at dawn. The next morning, Fan Xing said goodbye to everyone and set off. All the boys, including Yu Sanliang, stood and looked after the boy. The sun was illuminating the field, and everything was golden. Some time passed and Fan Xing was already far away from the fields. Something up ahead surprised him greatly. He was struck by the incredible beauty of the landscape before him. There was a large golden bell and a neat temple. Fan stepped closer to the large object. He ran his hand over it. There were three-dimensional patterns and images. When he touched it, the bell made a terribly loud sound. It rang out in waves around the neighborhood. The sound was picked up by all the trees and buildings in the immediate distance. However, the bell was large enough to be heard outside the city. High up in the mountains its voices were heard. The temples on the mountains also heard the ringing. Meanwhile, someone in a temple high up in the mountains was playing a board game. He was a young guy with long white hair and violet eyes. He was playing with an elderly man. The man asked why he was distracted. The guy replied that it didn't matter. It was just a sign of fate. The elderly man asked why he said that. The guy with white hair was silent. He didn't know what to answer the old man. He refrained from answering after all and offered to continue the game by making another move. They were sitting in a temple that from afar seemed quite small, but in fact there was plenty of room. The sun was setting over the horizon, slowly setting. One of the men had said that it was beyond their power to change the future. The large and heavy doors opened in front of Fan Xing. The sun met him. An old man was already standing in the doorway. He addressed the boy, calling him a young Taoist, asking if he had just rung the bell of pure thoughts. Fan Xing replied to the old man, calling him Elder Hui, that it was so. We smiled widely and kindly and told the boy that he was now an outer disciple of the Qingyun sect. He told him to enter, for he would be escorted out soon. Fan Xing's spiritual core Qi Fan Xing glowed in his abdomen. The boy didn't realize what had happened. Now he had a new plaque, or rather the old one had changed. It said that Fan Xing was an outer disciple. The protagonist was happy that the plaque had been updated. He lifted his head and looked around. He tried to find the elder who had just been around. The boy didn't realize where he had gone. Not finding him, Fan Xing decided it was no big deal and stretched, shouting to the inner gate to wait for him, for he was on his way. The view from above was of a uniform town with neat houses and streets. Nothing tall in the town. Xiao Jiangming stood in front of Fan Xing and studied some paper, commenting on something oddly. Fan Xing immediately recognized Xiao Jiangming, who had killed his group of bandits. His mere sight and presence made the protagonist very angry, but he also hoped that Xiao himself would not recognize him. Xiao Jiangming started to leave with words about how his life was a total headache after not finding this 10 thieves. Xiao Jiangming flew away while standing on his sword. Fan Xing told him to himself that he didn't need to look for him since he was right in front of him. For himself, the boy decided that sooner or later, he would definitely become stronger than Xiao Jiangming. Qingyun Outer Gate. It was daytime. Fan Xing was at the outer gate. It was a beautiful estate. Someone asked the protagonist if he was a new outer disciple. Fan Xing didn't understand who was asking and where he was coming from, so he started looking around. He had a white bag in his hand. Suddenly, right in front of the boy's nose, a young man in a neat blue robe with neatly gathered hair appeared. Fan Xing even dropped the bag from surprise and it fell to the ground. Fan Xing finally came to his senses and hurriedly bowed and greeted the elder. He introduced himself as Junior Fan Xing from the 3rd Bing district. The guy asked for his name tag without further ado or greeting. Fan Xing started rummaging through his clothes. He soon found it and held it out to the older man. The guy just waved his hand. And much to Fan Xing's surprise, the token ended up in the senior's hand. He looked at him and asked if the rank D abilities. He said they had another scum again. The token returned to the master's hands and Fan Xing asked what other rank D abilities were there. That's when he saw the letter D on the token. From behind, Yusan Liang rushed over and called out to Junior Fan. Fan Xing had already wanted to call him Senior Pig, but he ended up calling him Senior Yu. The guy who was checking Fan Xing told Brother Sanlin that he was in charge of distribution today, asked what he was doing here. The man was still out of breath after a long run. Then he got up to the guy and said that Fan Xing was his acquaintance, asked him to let him take care of him. He put a bag in the guy's hands as a bribe. The guy realized that there was money inside and smiled. Such tricks, or to put it more accurately, bribes, are clearly to his liking. Then he told Brother Sanlin that he was right. Sneaky and sly smiles appeared on the faces of both of them. The guy laughed and lastly said that he would leave the two old friends in that case. Yusan Liang waved at him with a benevolent expression on his face, but actually wanted him to leave as soon as possible. Get lost. When the guy was no longer in sight, Fan Xing turned around and told the manager that he didn't expect him to personally come to meet him, apologizing for disturbing him. The man laughed and asked which one was there, saying that he and he were of the same sex and therefore he was happy to help. They both laughed. Then Yusan Liang calmed down and asked the protagonist more seriously what his abilities were. Fan Xing hesitated and replied that this was exactly what he wanted to ask him. He asked what D rank abilities meant. The man then told him that outer disciples were divided into 4 ranks, A, B, C and D, according to their abilities. Fan Xing was terribly disappointed that his abilities sucked so badly. He was horrified, and the man calmed him down by telling him not to worry, because even he had D-rank abilities, saying that there were over 1,000 external disciples, and a large half of them were D-rank. Then Fan Xing shrugged his shoulders and said that abilities were given from birth. He asked Senior Yu to take him to a place where he could get used to it. The manager coughed. He said in a serious voice that the dormitory was important. But first, there's one important thing to do. Fan Xing silently listened to him. Soon they found themselves at a beautiful temple, or rather a pavilion of magical artifacts. At least that's what the sign said. Yu Sanliang told him that after being promoted to an outer apprentice, he should arrive at the magic artifact pavilion and choose one that he could use. He also warned that Junior Fan only had one single opportunity, so he should choose wisely. Fan Xing went forward with a confident step, while Yu Sanliang stayed waiting for him outside. He told Fan Xing not to rely on these bums. After all, he couldn't accompany him all the way. Fan Xing stepped forward. Suddenly, Yu Sanliang remembered something. The protagonist stopped and turned to the man. The one stared at him silently. Yu Sanliang said that the inner gate might seem like something inaccessible, but it was actually no different from the ordinary gate, saying that upon entering the magic artifact pavilion, he would need to concentrate and… Fan Xing smiled widely and interrupted the man, asking him not to worry so much. He wanted to say something else, but they were interrupted by shouts of how insolent this was. Yu Sanliang and Fan Xing turned around in surprise. There were 3 disgruntled men, all of them remarkably ugly. One of them asked how could an outsider invade the Qingyun sect's magical artifact pavilion. Fan Xing hurriedly bowed in front of them and told them that the recently promoted to outer disciple Fan Xing had come to obtain a magical artifact according to the sect's rules. He held out a token to the men. One of them took the outstretched token. Even though the man was very close by, Fan Xing didn't raise his eyes to look at him. He was frustrated by the realization that most likely they were trying to intimidate him. A man with teeth like a hare looked at the badge and said that the newcomers were not familiar with the rules, saying that this time they would forgive him for invading the pavilion. Then his face became terribly displeased and he said that just now, Fan Xing wasn't so empty-headed as to come after a magic artifact with nothing. In fact, it wasn't a statement at all. It was a question, but with only one correct answer. Fan Xing rubbed the back of his head and asked in puzzlement what he meant. The protagonist decided that it meant that the magic artifact was useful after all. After his question, the male hare pointed his finger at him, called him a puppy and asked if he didn't understand human words, yelling at him to chase the money away before they chased him away. Fan Xing asked them if they were hinting at mating in this way, asking them if they were afraid that he would report them to the sect. This made one of the men terribly angry. He was about to give something away. However, he was stopped. The male hare stopped him. He explained that his brother was small but understood the so-called rules. Both other men didn't understand what he was getting at. Then, the male hare pointed his hand to the passage to the pavilion and told Fan Xing that the elder was only teasing him, saying that he could go in and choose a magic artifact. But there was one but. He said that Fan Xing should be extremely careful. No good could be expected from this at all. Fan Xing walked up the aisle. Soon he was already standing inside looking at the cabinets in front of him. He was amazed at such a huge amount of artifacts. One of the 3 men went to get some sort of item. He brought out a beautiful box and placed it carefully on the floor. The male hare began to tell me that each student was given 1 stick of incense for their choice of magical artifact. Said he had already started lighting it. The man was just terribly mean. He said they had to follow the rules after all. A snide smile spreading across his face. Fan Xing calmly looked at the burning incense. He understood that there were at least 2,000 to 3,000 magic artifacts here, and you wouldn't know if he was normal or not from his appearance. He folded his hands behind his head and leisurely walked forward. Fan Xing walked and thought that the fact that this red-faced man was so satisfied was not surprising at all. The protagonist was thinking about the fact that if you start picking at random, the chances of picking up some crap are high. The boy walked over to the sword machine. He looked at them carefully. Someone had told him that they were flying swords made of red copper with 3 magical formations engraved broken. This surprised and frightened Fan Xing very much. He began to spin around and ask who had just said that. 2 men asked if the little one had gone completely head over heels. The male hare also looked at him in incomprehension of what was going on. Something struck Fan Xing even harder. It was because he was now standing beside another artifact and was told that it was a time of future flame, capable of releasing the intention of the flame, with 7 magical formations also broken. A low-rank flying sword. The material is 1st grade steel. Engraved 1 magical formation. Weak spiritual energy. Fan Xing realized that just by looking at it, all the information about magical artifacts just appeared in his mind. He speculated that it might be because of the yin-yang mirror of gods and demons. It was the same book he had devoured. Fan Xing now noticed that he could even see the cultivation level of others. He looked at the three men. The rat-faced one had the third rank of spiritual energy, while the other two didn't have it at all. It was now clear to Fan Xing why he was so brazen. He turned to the items again, thinking about the fact that from the looks of it, all the magical artifacts were either broken, had low spiritual energy, or had damaged magic formations. Fan Xing thought that they had hidden all the worthwhile items and would only get them if bribed. Suddenly, he noticed a mask nearby that didn't look attractive at all. He touched it, and then the knowledge that it was the mask of a 10,000-faced demon, a medium-ranked magical artifact. It contained 36 magical formations. It was intact. It was also known that it was a transforming magical artifact. When worn, it changed the appearance and circulation of chi in the body. Having 36 formations allowed one to reincarnate into 36 different people. Fan Xing was incredibly happy with the find. He decided that it was just the perfect artifact for killing and robbing. Just then the rat-faced man told the younger man that time was up. When he noticed the mask in Fan Xing's hands, there was no way he could remember the effect of the mask. Fan Xing told the older man that he was choosing her. The man not too kindly congratulated him on receiving the treasure and told him he could go. Fan Xing walked away proudly and contentedly, thinking that it was a false alarm and they were idiots. He was happy at how lucky he was today. The two men were laughing, one shouting that he had chosen a broken mask used to hide the dust after cleaning, the other saying just to look at what a pseudo-treasure it was, asking what he wanted, insulting them, shouting that the kid was already dreaming. The rat-faced man smiled widely and sneakily in his usual manner, saying that when Fan Xing returned to them to change his magic artifact, he would skin him. Yu Sangliang held the mask he had acquired in his hands. He looked at her thoughtfully. Then he showed his surprise that Fan Xing had stayed in the pavilion for so long and chose this mask. At first Fan Xing was silent, and after a while, told Senior Yu not to worry, assured him that he had a plan. Yu Sangliang exhaled a sigh of relief. Then he said that it was clear, and if he had already chosen, he would take him to a place where he could settle down. Fan Xing replied that he had been waiting for him to say that. Yu Sanliang was exhausted. He was breathing heavily and said that they had finally arrived, complaining about how far they had walked. Fan Xing, unlike the fatty, was still full of energy. They were now in some bamboo forest. More specifically in a city that was surrounded by forest. The city was in the mountains and had incredible beauty and nature. Fan Xing excitedly said that it was just a great place, said that it was near the mountains and the river, so it was also impregnable. He rejoiced in the fact that for soldiers to pass for nothing in their lives, it was only necessary to put up a palisade. He said. Yu Sanliang looked at him like a fool, because he did not understand what the fence and the soldiers had to do with it, what nonsense he was talking about. Then Fan Xing, deciding not to waste a minute of time, asked the elder Yu, which of the houses is now his? Then the man pointed with his hand and said that there was an empty house nearby, saying that Fan Xing could occupy it. Then they could take care of each other. Up ahead stood two houses. One was run down and neat, and the other the absolute opposite. Suddenly, Yu Sanliang remembered something about something and reached into his sleeve. He took out a book on perfecting Qi Qin Yun as well as some red ball from there, and held out the items to Fan Xing. He took them. The boy was more interested in the balloon. He asked what it was. Yu Sanliang was surprised that Fan Xing didn't even know this. He said that it was a spiritual stone, a cultivation material. His further refinement depended on it, saying that they, with D-rank abilities, are only given one every 3 months, and therefore one should definitely keep it. Fan Xing was struck by the fact that they only give one for 3 months, shouting that this sect is full of bogeymen. Yu Sanliang calmly replied that Fan Xing greatly underestimates spirit stones. He said that a red one could be sold for 100 gold coins in the mortal world. He said that considering their trifling abilities, it was still good that mediocrities like them were only given one every 3 months. Fan Xing cheered up and told Senior Yu that he would already return to practice. Yu Sanliang told him to go, and he had some business to attend to, and promised to come to his house in the evening to drink wine with the boy, and they said goodbye. The door to the cabin opened and sunlight streamed in. It was pretty clean inside, but there was only a table and 2 chairs. Despite this, Fan Xing was beyond happy. He was jumping and shouting how awesome it all was. Luckily, there was a bed after all, and Fan Xing cheerfully plopped onto it. Then he relaxed and told himself that for sure, it was much better here than in the medicine field. he pulled a new book out of his sweater. Fan Xing opened it and started reading. He realized that he didn't see much difference between the basic principles of qi refinement and qi forging. However, he could see that the description here was much more detailed. He pondered over the fact that it was not only talking about the movement of spiritual energy along the meridians, but also about learning to improve with the help of spiritual stones. Fan Xing put the book on the bed and sat next to it. Then he pulled out a red balloon from the same place. He looked at it and thought about trying to practice the method from the book. He laid it down in front of him, relaxed and closed his eyes. Fan Xing didn't see it, but the balloon began to glow. Soon he started limiting things altogether. The balloon fluttered in the air and shared energy with its new host. Night came, the month came out. Fan Xing was still sitting in the golden energy as well, and the balloon had long since shattered. The protagonist opened his eyes. He looked at his hands and became very happy. There was still golden spiritual energy on them, and he realized that as long as he used the stone, his spiritual energy had started to grow rapidly. Then he looked at the stone and found only splinters. He was upset and said to himself that the stone was of little use. It had not even been a day and he was already done. Fan Xing stretched and decided to go out for a walk, and at the same time asked the fatty where else to get spirit stones. Someone hit something and shrieked. It was Yusan Liang. It turned out that he was standing under the door, but Fan Xing did not know about it and abruptly swung the door open, hitting and pushing the man. Fan Xing was surprised that Senior Yu was standing under the door. He asked him about it. Yusan Liang was lying on the ground and holding his face. Then, still holding his nose, he asked didn't they agree that he would come over for a drink in the evening, said Fan Xing. Of course. Fan Xing opened the doors in time. Fan Xing helped the fatty inside and told him about the spirit stone, saying that it had run out and he wanted to go in to see the elder, asking how he knew he would come so soon. Yusan Liang finally removed his hand from his nose. There was quite a bit of blood. He did so because he was greatly surprised by the statement that Fan Xing had already used the stone. Now they were sitting at the table and the main character was telling them that in his opinion they were wearing out pretty quickly. One would obviously not be enough for him. He looked very unhappy as he said that he was going to ask Yusan Liang how to get them. Yusan Liang was amazed. He explained that it took him 10 days and nights to refine such a stone, but Fan Xing had done it in less than 24 hours. Such statements pleased and greatly flattered the protagonist. He smiled and said that he thought everyone coped like that. Yusan Liang vigorously shook his head and told him that he had never heard anyone so fast. He said that there was a place where Fan Xing could find more spirit stones, but it was useless to him right now. Fan Xing started pouring for the older man and shouted for him to tell him sooner. Yusan Liang took a saucer of wine and said that among the outer disciples, many were from rich families, said that they lacked cultivation materials and treasures, therefore were willing to shell out a large sum to buy them. Consequently, some of the sect members receive materials through various channels. From time to time they open a ghost market deep in the bamboo forest. The sect knows of its existence, but it is still an illegal business. Therefore it is not publicized. Therefore the participants of the ghost market disguise themselves and agree to make exchanges for each other's money or things, regardless of their identity. In the ghost market, as long as you have tons of money, getting spirit stones isn't a problem, he said, except that it was useless to know about him since Fan Xing had no money. Fan Xing was excited about the idea, so he asked the old man if he knew when the next time the ghost market would open. Yusan Liang wondered why the boy was asking. The next night in the ghost marketplace, there was a month and 2 guards at the gate. One of them spotted someone. They stopped a long-haired guy in a blue suit and asked the younger man what he had come here for. The one replied that by itself, to exchange something. It turned out to be Fan Xing in his mask. Only now, he looked much older than his usual self. The guards looked among themselves. Then one of them said that the younger one seemed to be a reasonable man. They gave him directions. Fan Xing passed and thought that as expected. The mask not only helped to change the external structure of the body, but also the voice. And the mask itself was able to change its appearance. Ahead was a crowd of people and tables of goods. Fan Xing said hello to the ghost market. People were sitting at tables and standing around, choosing, looking, thinking, changing, wondering about the price. Some without a counter, just selling merchandise. Fan Xing walked through the market and realized that there were far more people here than he had imagined. He didn't have many things in his bag. The smoky jug that his fourth uncle had given him could make people fall asleep for at least 2 hours if used properly. But the protagonist didn't know how he should go about it yet with so many people here. Suddenly, someone spoke loudly to all the brothers, asking them to listen to him. It was a masked man with a sack in his hands. He shouted that each of them had come here to trade. He suggested that they should not hesitate and make things fair. He said that in truth, many of them had just joined the sect, and what they needed the most right now were spiritual stones, saying that he happened to have a few dozen spiritual stones with him, and he planned to hand out to everyone as well. He opened the sack and a whole mountain of red spirit stones did indeed peek out from there. The guy said that outside of the market, an olin would cost 100 gold. He on the other hand charges 80. He said that if anyone wanted to purchase one, they should tell him right away. Fan Xing noticed that the voice was somehow familiar. The protagonist decided to look with the yin-yang gods and demons mirror, but other people were very interested in the offer. Especially they were attracted by the quantity, and the fact that the price was 20 coins lower. The full masked man was the first to say that he wanted to check the spirit stones. The guy who sells them agreed. The full guy took the 2 stones in his hands. Those almost instantly began to glow. Then he opened his eyes, and when he saw it, he shouted that they were real and he wanted 5 of them. After this inspection, everyone wanted stones for themselves, some 3, some 2. They immediately started counting their money. Fan Xing's eyes were glowing red as he looked at the spirit stone seller and realized that his spiritual energy resembled that of the rat-faced man in the magic artifact pavilion. The protagonist realized that the fact that he had so many spirit stones was not surprising. He thought that the rat-faced man was going to make a lot of money from them. The salesman raised his hand and addressed the brothers again. He turned the bag over and rubbed it, showing it was empty. The guy apologized and said he had sold all the spirit stones. Many, those who did not manage to buy in stone, were greatly distressed. The rat-faced man saying that he could not buy anything today and he would come next time. Suddenly, some guy with a black mask over his eyes said he had something too. Would trade for spirit stones or a magic artifact. The guy had a black robe, a green ring and an eye mask, and he said he really didn't know if anyone who came could afford it. He extended his hand with the ring forward and spiritual energy swirled there. Suddenly, for everyone, a golden sword began to emerge from the guy's palm. Soon the guy had a beautiful weapon in his hands. Everyone was shocked, standing with their mouths open asking how he retrieved the sword. Does he really wear a Dongtian ring on his hand? A Dongtian ring is an abode ring or a guardian ring. One of the guys said that he emitted terrifying spiritual energy, clearly unusual. The guy in black said that it was a mid-rank flying sword, saying that it was the 9 Serpents Golden Flame Sword, a magical artifact he bought when joining the sect, saying that it was useless to him now, but the younger ones might well need it. He told them that he had bought this artifact for 10,000 gold, so he would take at least 100 spirit stones for it. People were already disappointed. One asked who among them could afford it. He asked the older man for at least a small discount, explaining that he was afraid no one would be able to afford it. The guy in black stretched his arm forward and agreed. He said he only came to try, that's why he didn't think they could buy it. Then someone asked for a moment of attention. It was the masked Fan Xing. He said that he had a magical artifact in no way inferior to this sword. He pulled out a pouch in front of him and said that he wondered if he had attracted an elder. Apparently attracted, and the guy in black asked if it was true. Fan Xing took out a jug, handed it to the guy in black and offered to check it out for himself. Then the guy told the younger one his jug, a true magical artifact, but not of high rank. He scrutinized the item. Fan Xing replied that he thought the elder was mistaken. He said that in response to his words, he would show everyone present what a true artifact was, and golden spiritual energy swirled around. Fan Xing said for everyone to open their eyes wide. He might only appear weak because of your inattention. Everyone looked at the jug carefully. Something began to happen. Purple smoke poured from the jug. It floored everyone present. Some just stood there surprised and some tried to cover themselves from the smoke. That's when the guy in black realized what it was and was very surprised. He looked up, but more to see the smoke. The guy started falling backwards. Soon, everyone was sound asleep, and Fan Xing took on his usual appearance. The guys lay on the floor and slept soundly. However, one rat-faced man was still awake. He saw Fan Xing in his real guise and poked his finger at him. However, it didn't last long at all, and after a few seconds, he had already fallen into sleep. Fan Xing smiled widely and said to himself that the disciples were somehow too trusting. He looked at them and advised them to consider that he had taught them a lesson. Heard someone calling for someone to follow him, for something had happened there. Fan Xing started to get nervous. He was saying that everything sucked and he shouldn't have chilled out so much. He was hitting himself on the head and wondering how I could have forgotten about the guards. Then he thought about it. As far as he remembered, their cultivation level was higher than his, and therefore he was clearly in a shitty situation. The protagonist decided it was time to go back. 2 guards came running to the place where the market used to stand. Now it was just a rookery. Suddenly, they noticed something. It was a blue jug that swept between them. They were extremely surprised. One asked the other if it was just a jug. Then Fan Xing stood in front of them, but of course not in his usual form. He put on his mask again and became an adult. The guards ordered him to stand and asked him what he had done to the others, who he was and why he had come here. Fan Xing introduced himself as the 10th thief of Ghost Mist Valley, saying that he came to contact them to make some money. One of the guards asked the other didn't the Ghost Mist Valley was not destroyed by Brother Shao. The other told him to just score and kill him first, saying that it was worth it for the sect to know. They would all be finished here. The guards swarmed towards Fan Xing. The protagonist deftly dodged the first attack. He wasn't at all happy with the fact that he hadn't managed to buy time. A sharp sword blade was already flying at him. Fan Xing dodged again despite the guard putting his sword right under his throat. However, the protagonist didn't get very far, and so the blade cut his skin. Now he couldn't move, because if he did, the sword would be thrust into his neck, so deep that it would be too late to take a breath. Fan Xing decided that he was done for. This was where he would find his death. Then he put his hands up in the air as a sign of retreat. But all was well. The guards were affected by the jug after all and fell into slumber. The jug stood nearby. Fan Xing wiped the sweat from his forehead and said to himself that it had finally worked. This time he was saved. The guards were lying at his feet. Then the main character said it was time to look at the treasure they had collected for him. He was awfully pleased with himself now, going to search each of them thoroughly. It was morning, the birds were singing, and the boys were still sleeping in the place of the ghost market. But many of them had already lost their masks. The guy in black woke up. He opened his eyes and didn't realize what was going on or where he was at all. He stood up. He had a slight headache and rubbed it with his hand. That's when he noticed there was nothing on his arm. He was horrified to find that the ring was not there. The boy screamed so loudly that even the birds that sat high in the trees scattered in terror. Fan Xing sat quietly in his home. He told himself that he thought he heard someone's voice. Then he stretched forward his hand with the ring and said he didn't care. We'd have to see what he'd gotten his hands on. A sword, many spirit stones, coins and other things appeared in front of him. Fan Xing looked at his hand, especially the finger with the ring, and said that it was a convenient ring. Carrying everything in a bag would be much more suspicious. The main character was very excited to be able to carry other items in it. Next, he picked up his sword, extended it in front of him, and closed his eyes. Spiritual energy swirled around. It went out and Fan Xing opened his eyes and looked at the beautiful weapon again. He said that it looked like he wouldn't be able to use this sword with his current cultivation level, which made him a little sad. However, he saw that it was a good thing, and would be useful in the future. Fan Xing shifted his attention to the spirit stones. He had obtained them, which meant that cultivation could begin. 3 months later, Yusan Liang knocked on the door and called for Junior Fan. His house was already neat and tidy. Yusan Liang kept knocking and knocking, calling and calling, but no one answered him. At first, the protagonist didn't react in any way to the screams outside. He was clearly heavily preoccupied with something. Fan Xing was still sitting in his room just like 3 months ago, the shards of spirit stones lying in front of him. He told himself that the rate of improvement was getting slower and slower, and the last stone was over. He said he's been on the cusp of the first level of spiritual shift for over a month now, but no progress. Now he heard a man calling for Junior Fan and asking if he was here. Fan Xing said that he should find the time to go to the ghost market again for spirit stones. Fan Xing finally opened Senior Yu's door and asked him not to shout, lying that he was asleep. Yusan Liang told Junior Fans that he had only gone out to eat a few times in the past few months, and slept the rest of the time. Fan Xing obviously did not want to listen to anything, so he closed his ears in a showy manner and said that it was starting again. Yusan Liang followed him and kept saying that he could not do such a thing. He said that he was going to call into the branch manager to get a job, so Fan Xing would be able to get a spiritual stone every month, but he did not want to. Yusan Liang asked how Junior was going to live on if he was lazy at such a young age. No one answered him, and then he finally stopped wailing and said that he wouldn't listen to him anyway. Then he told him that today was the day of the distribution of spiritual stones to D-rank disciples. He offered to go with him, at least his, but Fan Xing must get. This news has already pleased the protagonist. He replied that the man has already talked about it, and suggested not to delay. Yu Sanliang was surprised that, judging from Fan Xing's tone, he had plenty of stones, but he knew that one spirit stone was already very cool. Fan Xing realized that it was better not to tell the fatty about the spirit stones because with cheeks like that, he clearly couldn't keep his mouth shut. Yu Sanliang was telling the younger man that getting one spirit stone was already good and therefore it was worth hurrying. Qingmu Pavilion was full of disciples. There were also 4 important people sitting under different letters. Underneath the letter A sat a stately elderly man, full of strength, with a sheet of chart paper and a pouch of spirit stones in front of them. The students stood in line in front of him, some chatting amongst themselves. The line to see him was not big at all. The group of D-rank disciples, on the other hand, was full of people. Fan Xing and Yu Sanliang were also standing in their ranks. The protagonist told his buddy that in this sect, even spiritual stones are distributed on a first-come, first-served basis, separated by ability, saying that the A rankers were empty and they had to cramp up. Yu Sanliang was sweating from the heat. He wiped his face with a handkerchief and asked who knew that there were so many D-ranks here. Such a crowd. Then he whispered to the younger one that he thought it was because of the incident at the ghost market 3 months ago. Fan Xing felt a little embarrassed and asked what happened there. Yu Sanliang said that he had heard, 3 months ago, a mysterious person appeared in the ghost market and cleaned everyone involved to the ground. He said that he had never heard of such a thing happening in the ghost market. This was most likely the first time such a thing had happened. He said that since that guy hadn't been captured yet, the ghost market was still not allowed to reopen. As it turned out, many D-rank disciples from wealthy families relied on buying various artifacts. None of them had ever stood in such a line for just 1 stone, and now that the ghost market had suspended, they had to come here and wait. But weren't there too many of them? Fan Xing pondered. He realized that if he suspended his work, he would have to find another way. Soon it was Fan Xing's disciples' turn to thank the elder for the stone. He did so. The elder was a young fellow with snow-white long hair. He told the young man to choose a less winding path and focus more on cultivation. Fan Xing replied that he was right, promising that the disciples would redouble their efforts to elevate the Qingyun sect. The elder said he was pouring sweetly and let him go. Fan Xing sincerely hoped that this old man didn't know what he had done. Yu Sanliang flew over to him and told the protagonist to listen to him and hurry up and hide the spirit stone, saying that they should quickly return. No need to linger here. Fan Xing showed the older man the stone and asked why he was so nervous. Yu Sanliang took the guy by the shoulder and asked doesn't he know that there are hooligans taking away stones. He said that if they slowed down and were stopped, they would beat them up and take everything. He asked if Fan Xing wanted to deal with such. Fan Xing asked, wondering if the sect was looking past this. The man replied that it was actually forbidden, but in fact no one cared, saying that even if they were robbed, the elders would see it as a small skirmish between the outer disciples. Said that moreover, Fan Xing just joined the sect and has no support. He might just be beaten to death. As a result, the sect will say that there was a mistake and punish the attacker with a year of imprisonment. Fan Xing blurted out. He smiled broadly and talked about how scared he was. In fact, that's what he wanted. Someone called out to Senior Yu and said that he was a little early today. This scared Yu Sanliang. A tall and intimidating young man stood before them. Yu Sanliang bowed in front of the guy and said, Junior Yu Sanliang greeted Senior Lu. The guy asked where he lost his respects. Yu Sanliang was already chickening out of fear. He replied having already honored him with a spiritual stone during the last meeting. He asks the elder to leniency and leave the younger one the stone. The older man asked if the younger man was bargaining with him. Then Yu Sanliang replied that he wouldn't dare and held out his red spirit stone to him. The older man took the stone, smiled and replied that the man was doing the right thing. Now he approached Fan Xing, told the little guy it was his turn, asked him where his spirit stone was. Poor Fan Xing was shaking with fear. The older man smiled, called him a snot and said he was asking for it. Yu Sanliang decided to intervene. He gently told Senior Lu that this junior had only recently entered the sect and was not familiar with the rules. He said he could out of respect for him. This time Senior Lu, the older man's leg went up. He punched the man hard in the stomach and he flew to the floor. And Senior Lu asked what other respect and who was Yu Sanliang to recognize him. Yu Sanliang's head hit the ground painfully. The protagonist held out the spiritual stone to Senior Lu. He smiled widely at him and said that Senior Lu was a good person with deep self-cultivation and fine righteousness. He told him that he just joined the sect and would like to meet the elders in the sect. Fang asked Senior not to refuse and accept this spiritual stone. Senior Lu was actually surprised. He held out his hand for a rock and said the little one was more savvy than that fat pig on the ground. Suddenly, the stone was not in Fan Xing's hands. He slipped out and promptly flew to the floor. The spirit stone fell down and recoiled. Fan Xing fell to the ground to pick it up. Udin said that he almost broke it. Senior Lu smiled and thought about the fact that a newcomer who had just joined the sect had never heard of spiritual stones being broken. Fan Xing discreetly pulled out a knife for Senior Lu. Yu San Liang noticed this and was horrified. Right now, the main character was flying at Senior Lu. Before he could object, Fan Xing stabbed him straight into his stomach, and very deeply. The older man's face twisted from the impact, his head immediately becoming a bit woozy. The elder Lu twisted in pain. He wanted to catch the small one, but he deftly slipped out of his hands. He abruptly pulled the knife from the abuser's abdomen. It was a nightmarishly intense pain. Fan Xing hurriedly jumped away. Senior Lu was terribly angry. He asked how this little bastard dared to suddenly attack him. A chill ran through his body. Fan Xing then asked the elder Lu, being a robber, shouldn't he be more vigilant? The protagonist was completely calm and confident. After this question, Lu called the boy an asshole and asked if he thought he was up to it. The elder Lu, despite his deplorable position and condition, was still just as arrogant and proud. He searched for something in the sweater of his robes, promising he would show the younger Fan now. However, when he found nothing on the spot, it horrified him. The man abruptly, almost ripping the clothes on him, in search of the desired object. Fan Xing had already managed to get what the elder needed. He held a beautiful and clean to shine dagger in his hand. He said that it was a low-rank magical artifact, a flying sword with 7 carved magical formations. He told the elder to excuse him, but he had already taken it anyway. This angered Senior Lu much more, and veins swelled on his forehead and temples. Fan Xing didn't have the time or desire to wait for long. With a small smile on his face, he threw himself at his opponent. Now this was when Lu was actually scared. The protagonist did not immediately use the man's cold weapon. He only kicked him hard. Senior Lu's nose bled, and he flew to the ground. Now he lay on the dirty floor and stared at the small opponent, cursing everything around him. Fan Xing put his foot on fearful Lu's back, purposely humiliating him even more. Lu thought TMO that this little bastard had pierced his dantian. He couldn't release spiritual energy. Yu San Liang decided to intervene. He thought that things couldn't be left as they were. The well-fed man ran to Fan Xing, shouting that it would be better to return his flying sword to him, for he had obtained it from the magical artifact pavilion. Said that you can't take away the artifacts that the disciples got in that pavilion. If you decide to steal, the sect elders will come for your soul. Senior Lu then shouted to the pigtailed man to shut up. After all, he was in league with this little guy, shouting that as soon as his wounds healed, he would come for Yu San Liang's soul. After saying that, Fan Xing pressed his head into the asphalt even harder. The boy told the older man that he was afraid he wouldn't even have a chance. These words terrified Lu terribly. He asked in a trembling voice whether he dared to kill him. He shouted at Fan Xing not to talk nonsense. They are in a cult. Fan Xing smiled and said that so Lu still understood where they were. He told him not to worry. After all, he would be careful and try not to kill him. A loud cry of pain was heard, loud enough that the birds were frightened and took to the sky. Fan Xing now had 4 spiritual energy stones in his hands. He asked in what only Lu was yucking about. He said that the elder had 5 spiritual stones. He also said that the flying sword was a useful thing, but there was no way to use it. Yu San Liang walked along with Fan Xing and asked the younger man if he had made him scum. Fan Xing replied not to worry. After all, he had only destroyed Du. Said he was just giving him a good pounding to let his ring slowly recover. Said it would take 3 to 5 months for it to fully recover. Yu San Liang came in shock. He asked didn't he come to take revenge after this period of time. Fan Xing replied that even if he showed up, he would kick his ass again. Then he threw the older man 2 stones and told him to keep them. They would come in handy. He said he was kind of his friend now after all, so he wouldn't let the older man get hurt. The man caught the stones. Fan Xing went further, saying that as he had observed, the sect was like a den of bandits. Either you intimidate and rob or you are. Such is the law of the jungle. Now both of them walked calmly to the houses. Yu San Liang said that he did not expect to hear such words from a person so young. He said that he began to like Fan Xing much more. Fan Xing asked if he meant to say that he had treated him badly before. The man hurriedly replied that this was not the case. He said that he had realized that Fan Xing was not an easy person in the medicine field. Yu San Liang opened his mouth but remained silent. The sky was blue with white clouds. A single temple in the mountains could be seen ahead. As the 2 men sat inside the temple and played a board game, one sect elder told the other that he had heard that Uncle Mentor had come down from the mountain today and was personally distributing spiritual stones to the outer disciples. The guy replied that he just decided to take a walk. The old man, making another move, asked if he did it to make contact with that student. The guy suggested not talking about it, just playing. Something caught his attention. He looked up somewhere. He had to squint to see. Then even harder. And then some more. He looked up at the sky. The 9 coffins that flew in space above the planet, with enchanted spiritual energy swirling around them. Fan Xing was practicing in his room as usual. Golden spiritual energy was flying around him, and the red stone had already been broken. Soon, Fan Xing opened his eyes. He was overjoyed that he had finally broken through to the second level of spiritual shift. The protagonist got out of bed and stretched. He reflected on the fact that even without the release of energy, he felt much better. He also recalled that guy, Senior Lu, had a level 3 spiritual shift. If he hadn't stabbed at Dong Tian at that moment and blocked his spiritual power, it would have been extremely fucked up. Fan Xing wonderfully understood that when he came to take revenge, it was worth fearing that there would be no such opportunity, and therefore there would be no choice but to fight head-on. He stretched his ringed hand forward and pulled out a golden sword. Fang figured he should be stronger by then. Fan Xing placed 2 fingers in front of his face and closed his eyes. With his other hand he supported his sword. Everything around him lit up with golden energy. Lightning and discharges began to envelop the sword. Fan Xing felt uneasy and furrowed his brows. It was so hard that he was already drenching himself in 7th sweat. The boy opened his eyes and saw what was happening to the sword. What he saw startled him and he shrieked. Then his eyes widened at the sight of the sword. The unimaginable happened. Huge and terrifying snakes emerged from the sword. Fan Xing even had to cover himself from the bright light. The sword fell loudly to the floor. The sound of tinkling metal was heard. Fan Xing exhaled and said that with his cultivation, it was extremely difficult for him to handle this sword. Some sounds were heard outside the window. Fan Xing realized that it was the fatty coming again. Right now it didn't please him at all. And he was right. Yu Sanliang didn't even have time to knock or even call out to Junior Fan. The lavish hero himself opened the doors in front of him. The man was a little surprised. However, he didn't pay much attention to it. He immediately began to tell him that he had come to call for him. Seeing the state Fan Xing was in, he asked if he had slept at all today. Fan replied that he really hadn't slept as he wanted to finish his training. They walked inside. The boy said that if the elder didn't bring him wine and meat every day, he wouldn't even open up to him. Yu Sanliang asked him not to talk like that. They should alternate between resting and cultivating, but that wasn't the point right now. He offered a drink. They clinked saucers with the already poured wine. Yu Sanliang said, not understanding at all how Fan Xing manages to drink so much. Fan Xing sipped his wine and replied that somehow, he said that in his valley, he could drink a few kegs with an elder's stature. After drinking, the man felt better and asked the younger man if he remembered Ho Qing. Fan Xing tensed up and asked if it was the same guy who had kicked him in Xiaoman. He hit the table and, without waiting for an answer to his question, replied that of course he remembered, promising that as soon as he met him again, he would kick him so hard that he would not be surprised. Yu Sanliang seriously replied that this was completely unacceptable, saying that Junior wouldn't even be able to imagine who he was. The man said that Ho Qing was one of the few who had obtained A-rank abilities in the past few years, and the elders believed that Ho Qing would be able to break through to the 4th level of spiritual shift this year, and obtain the title of inner disciple. He said that a few days ago, 3 3rd-level shift disciples had stopped Ho Qing in Qisha Valley. She said that they probably thought that since he was alone, they would be able to fight him. But who could expect him to kill 3 people with a single sword strike? The rumor had already spread throughout the sect. Fan Xing poured more wine for his buddy and told him that as far as he could remember, he, Yu Sanliang, had a good relationship with him, saved him the trouble of standing in line and helped him register in the sect. Fan Xing said this with such a serious face that Yu Sanliang felt uncomfortable. He rubbed the back of his head and asked the boy not to make fun of him. He said that before entering the sect Ho Qing was very kind to him, but once he entered, Ho Qing immediately changed. He said that not long ago he met him in the workers' department. He did not even look at him. Fan Xing replied that judging from his voice, Yu Sanliang was offended, asking if the man would sycophantize in front of him in public. This kind of questions were getting more and more out of favor with Yu Sanliang. He coughed and suggested not to talk about it anymore. Then he remembered that Fan Xing seemed to have asked him to tell him the next time the ghost market opened. This reminder interested the protagonist much more. Fang wondered if he meant to say that he would work again. 3 days later was the opening of the ghost market. As usual, it was night. The graceful moon was flaunting in the sky and illuminating the nocturnal nature shrouded in thick fog. There were many more guards at the gate now, and they were probably better trained in case of danger. The guards stood in a so-called circle and were discussing something heatedly. A beautiful girl with long dark hair, wearing a beautiful purple dress, was walking up the second-hand steps. She was thinking that it seemed that after that incident, the members of the ghost market had learned a lot. She was holding a small but quite heavy bag. Soon the girl reached the peak of the steps and met up with the guards. They all looked at her. After that, one of the guards stopped her and asked the older woman to wait. He had to find out what the purpose of her visit was. The girl had a bandage on her face, but it was so transparent that all the features of her neat face were clearly visible even in the dark. She hurriedly replied that since she was here, she needed cultivation materials, asking what kind of nonsense they were asking in such a case. Her answer didn't satisfy the guard. He still held his weapon in front of her and said that she had heard about the robbery at the ghost market 3 months ago. Because of that man, they had to increase the security. The other guard, the one standing next to her, asked the girl to show him what she had brought and give it to him for evaluation. The girl took her pouch and replied that everything was clear, and since she was here she would follow the rules. But she warned the guards that she would have to carefully check all her items. What they saw inside the bag horrified the guards, and all of them. They didn't expect to see such a huge amount of gold coins in front of them. The girl said that she came to buy a flying sword that she could use. That's why she came with money. One of the crowd of guards replied that since she was so rich, she should be careful not to let herself be robbed. The girl was incredibly beautiful. The guards lined up in 2 rows, giving her the way. One thanked the older one for stepping in and asked her to pass. The girl forgave them, said it was all the fault of that damn thief. Lastly, she wished the guys good service. The 2 guards looked after her. One commented on what a juicy body this girl had, while the other hurriedly shut him up so she wouldn't hear in any way. There was some man in the market selling artifacts, shouting for people to come over and look. 3 guys in black were discussing something. Then they noticed a beautiful girl in a purple dress. They were shocked by her beauty. The girl saw that there were a lot more people here than last time, and all of them were at the 2nd level of spiritual shift and some at the 3rd. There were indeed a lot of masked disciples in front. This girl turned out to be Fan Xing. This time the mask had turned him into a girl and it was just terribly uncomfortable for him. He also realized that from the looks of it, the previous incident had scared the newcomers a lot and now there were veterans loitering around. Fan Xing realized that like last time, he was walking forward and heard people's voices, one asking how much for him, another saying that there was a large assortment, a wide selection. Then Fan Xing turned his attention to something. The man who was ignored and yelled at them not to pass by only got a glance. A fellow did approach him and he named him a price of 30 gold pieces, telling the older man to be careful on the way back. Fan Xing knelt down and looked at the items. The guys began to discuss that she had a keen eye, saying that this flying sword had a powerful magic formation. It could be taken from outside for at least 1,000 gold. He would take it. Fan Xing asked if this sword was authentic. The vendor asked the elder what she was talking about. He told her that he had come to the ghost market to trade, and therefore why would he sell her a fake sword? Then Fan Xing in the guise of a girl repeated what he was asking, whether his sword was genuine or not. The salesman became uneasy. It was night. The month was the only source of light in the market. A girl was sitting on her knees and holding a sword. Said that the magic formation on the flying sword seemed to be intact, but in fact it was damaged. Said that it was barely usable. This girl was Fan Xing. He said that if someone decides to try it out here, nothing will happen, but with full use it is sure to break. Besides the sword, there were red spirit stones and a blue bowl on the bed in front of the vendor. Fan Xing asked the vendor how he made these spirit stones. While usually the stones were perfectly round, these were flattened. However, Fan Xing said that they were as good as the real ones in color and smell. He asked if the seller knew what would be done to him for selling counterfeits in the ghost market. The salesman was covered in cold sweat. He said that the older one had such a sharp eye. It turns out he had met an expert. He bowed in front of her and explained that the junior was confused for a while and asked the senior to turn a blind eye to it. Fan Xing looked straight into his eyes. Then he replied that he would easily do it, saying that he was a man who valued talent. He was only wasting his time using his skills to create fakes. Fan Xing offered the seller a deal in which he would tell her his real name and do her some favors, and his shenanigans would remain a secret. The vendor held a token in his hand, and Fan Xing had to explain that she didn't need the one hanging, she needed the real one. That's what was hiding behind the slot. Such observation on the part of the girl amazed the salesman. He had to give her a token. Fan Xing took it. Now he knows that the seller's name is Hua Qianji and he is an outer B-rank disciple. Hua Qianji asked what she wanted him to do for her. Fan Xing threw him the token back and replied that nothing yet, but she would let him know once she thought of something. Fan Xing glanced at the other visitors with an edge of his eye. he realized that something was going on there, stood up and told Hua Qianji to wait for her here. Hua Qianji in turn sat down on the ground and stared at the girl in astonishment. He agreed and promised to wait for her. Hua Qianji looked after the elder and couldn't tear his gaze away. It turned out that there was a masked Ho Ching sitting under one of the trees. People ran into each other and asked those standing long ago why there were so many people here and what he was selling. Someone replied that it was a demonic spiritual pill. Told that the demonic spiritual pill was worth 100 spiritual stones. Said that he was seeing this guy for the first time. Ho Ching sat quietly and looked at all of them. Among the crowd was a girl, Fan Xing. The guy said that he was the only one who insisted on exchanging it for refined stone powder. They thought it was overkill. After all, they didn't understand how they could exchange it for something of their mutual desire. Fan Xing thought about the stone powder. A demonic purple pill lay in front of Ho. The essence of a large number of spiritual stones, purified with the nita through a special method, is an important raw material for the breakthrough pill. In the early stages of cultivation, it's very difficult to obtain the 4th and 7th levels as well as the perfect spirit level. It's incredibly difficult to reach these levels. So many people stay on anyone for their entire lives. With the pill it's much easier to break through the 3 stages. Whether it is the breakthrough pill itself or refined stone powder, everything is strictly guarded by the sect. They are not easily taken out. This is the kind of control the sects and big families have to decide the fate of cultivators. If you want to receive, give away your wealth, or take away the reward for a great achievement. Fan Xing realized that Ho Qing's cultivation seems to be at the peak of the 3rd level of shift. He wants to try his luck and break through to the 4th level with the breakthrough pill. The sect may turn a blind eye to the existence of the ghost market, but if the refined stone powder appears here, the market will have to close again. Fan Xing pondered. He pondered that if he was trying to break through from the 3rd level to the 4th level, could he be? Ho Qing closed his eyes. When he opened them, he looked belligerent and strong. Fan Xing walked right up to Ho Qing and whispered in his ear to not say anything and follow her. Fan Xing rushed over, and Ho Qing called out to the elder. After he called out to her, Fan Xing was definitely convinced that it was Ho Qing's voice, that it was him. Ho Qing was standing behind him. Fan Xing calmly stepped forward in the guise of a beautiful girl. Ho Qing had to run after her, so interested was she in him. Finally he caught up with her and asked the elder if she had any refined stone powder. Fan Xing stopped. Then he abruptly turned around and smacked Ho Qing in the face. Ho Qing was very surprised and angered by this. He even turned blue with rage, and shouted out aloud, "You." The girl asked what she was. She shouted that she had never met an idiot like him, saying that even if it was a ghost market, who would trade such a thing in the open? Fan Xing shouted that if the sect found out about this, they would start a thorough investigation regarding every visitor, saying that she, him, and everyone else here would be the end of it. Ho Qing's hands were trembling. He was still terribly angry, but restrained himself and said that the elder had taught that one could not be too impatient and reckless. He asked her to let him ask. Ho Qing started talking about refined stone powder. Fan Xing turned away and replied that he could indeed get him, except that the fee would be extremely high. The protagonist glared at Ho Qing with the corner of his eye and warned him that if he blabbed and rumors spread, not only her, even her father. He realized that he had bent and told Ho Qing to just forget about it, justified it by the fact that such a scum like Ho Qing could not understand, even if everything was chewed up for him. Ho Qing bowed in front of the girl and asked the elder not to worry, saying that he, the junior, also came from a noble family, shouting that once he successfully made a breakthrough, he would say that it was because of the item delivered by his clan. No harm to the elder. Ho Qing thought he was clear. He thought it was arrogance, and the father she had blabbed about. He thought that this girl came from one of the richest families in the world. Her father must have a high position in the sect. Then he realized that it made a lot of sense, because only such people could afford such rare things. Fan Xing proudly looked up and said that they had agreed, saying that the fact that he understood the situation was good, but one demon pill would not be enough. Ho Qing was a little surprised. He stood up and told her that she was being refined from a 3rd-grade monster's inner pill. Her spiritual energy was equivalent to 100 spiritual stones. He asked could he add another one, or a couple. At that time, Fan Xing named a price of 4 demonic pills. Ho Qing vigorously shook his head, shouting that there was no way Junior could get that much. In that case, Fan Xing sent him an air kiss and said that since they were done, she would pretend that she had never seen him. Ho Qing's jaw dropped from shock. He took her by the shoulder and told her to take her time. Ho Qing said he agreed to 4. Apparently that's how bad his breakthrough was. He said, except here, he'd need a few days to prepare. Fan Xing replied that it was a matter of course, saying that after all, it would also take her some time to get the refined stone sand. Fang set a date in 9 days, at noon, when she would go to the mountain of Holin Valley, told Ho Qing to wait for him there, and would show up as soon as she gave the signal by clapping her hands 3 times. She reminded him to remember to bring what they had agreed upon. Ho Qing had yet to reply anything when the beautiful girl disappeared. However, he was in agreement. Up ahead was the sign for the entrance to the ghost market. Fan Xing returned to the vendor. There was already no one in the market. Everyone had long left. Hua Qianji was surprised that she had come after all. Then Fang told Junior Ho that tomorrow she would send someone to him. He would tell him what was necessary. The protagonist assured him that there was no need to worry, for he was in good hands. Hua Qianji asked the elder if he could still find out what everything needed. He looked at the girl through the mask interestedly. Fan Xing didn't want to tell him anything right now, so he started to move towards the exit, saying that he would find out when the time came. Hua Qianji was silent. One of the guards noticed a beautiful girl in a purple dress and blushed heavily, then told the older woman that she was leaving a little early somehow. The guards surrounded her on all sides. Fan Xing replied to them that they were right. After all, she had bought what she needed. Night shrouded the city. The surroundings were quiet and empty, the fog settling on the cold grass. Hua Qianji was sitting on his bed at home. There was still no way he could sleep. The guy was clearly very nervous and was peering at the doors. There was nothing there yet. No one had tried to disturb him. It wasn't long, however, before someone knocked. Although Hua Qianji had waited and prepared for a long time, he was trembling with fear. The salesman walked up the aisle and asked who was there. Hua Qianji was even more surprised when he opened the door and heard someone calling him from downstairs as Big Brother. It was Fan Xing in his usual appearance. He handed the senior an envelope and said that someone had asked him to give him this letter. Hua Qianji looked around to see if there were any witnesses. Then he dragged the boy into the house with lightning speed. Now, inside, Hua Qianji lifted the protagonist, who was 4 times smaller than himself, by the scruff of his neck and asked what other someone was, where she lived. He shouted for the little boy to tell everything, warning that if he talked nonsense, he would make the boy suffer. Fan Xing shouted that he did not know anything, saying that while he was carrying water, he noticed that an elder came over. She said that this letter was for Hua Qianji. Fan Xing shat himself with fear, recounting that she also said that he would give him a reward when he delivered the message. Hua Qianji silently regarded the boy. He still threw him on the floor and said that she had sent cannon fodder, shouted that he would not give him any reward, and that the kid should get out of here and hurry up. Fan Xing painfully fell to the floor and yelped. Hua Qianji left, and Fan Xing only got to his feet. His tailbone was very sore, and therefore he walked like an old man. Fan Xing remembered something and told his older brother about it. He said that his sister had asked him to pass something on. In Hua Qianji's hand was an envelope. This information interested him much more. Fan Xing said that if he did everything as stated in the letter, he would not be out of business. If he failed, she would turn to someone else. Immediately after saying this, Fan Xing left. Hua Qianji looked over to where he was standing earlier and, not finding anyone there, was amazed at how quickly the little guy had fled. Hua Qianji decided that since this was the case, he should do everything in his power to help that girl. He finally stopped being scared. He reread the paper handed over by the little boy once more. Now that he read more carefully, the written words struck him. The girl wanted him to produce purified stone powder for her. This shocked Hua Qianji. He loudly asked, what was she thinking? 9 days later, the pouch was already in Fan Xing's hands. The sand inside shone brightly. He told Hua Qianji that the work was not bad, and she was not wrong about him. She said that it was obviously just stone powder coated with spiritual liquid, but in color and smell quite like refined. Fan Xing was actually satisfied with his work. Hua Qianji was also pleased by her words. He said that he used to work in the pill quarter and was lucky enough to know what refined stone powder looked like, saying that he had seen many processing methods that made the sand look like the real thing. His cheeks reddened when he said that Strakey had a keen eye, a talent for seeing through. Then the girl threw Hua Qianji another pouch, the one he deserved, and said that she would keep her word. Opening the pouch, Hua Qianji was pleasantly surprised and quite happy. He said that the elder was so polite. The seller already wanted to say something. However, the girl immediately disappeared, and Hua Qianji didn't understand at all how she had slipped away so quickly. Fan Xing, in the guise of a beautiful girl, clapped his hands. Then some more. And also, the main character was now in the bamboo forest, on the path where he had been yesterday with Ho Qing. Something swept between the night's greenery. Fan Xing took out a knife and headed towards the source of the sound. Someone jumped sharply out of the thicket. It turned out to be a black cat with yellow eyes. Fan Xing, in the guise of a woman, exhaled in relief. He was about to leave. Suddenly, right behind Fan Xing's back was Ho Chang. He looked up at the girl and said that she was an hour late and he was already waiting. Fan Xing hurriedly recoiled. He said that she had asked him to come around 10, but didn't say that she herself would be there by then. The protagonist thought about how he didn't even notice him when he was so close. It seems the cultivation gap is much higher than he imagined. Besides, he is ruthless. He should be even more careful. Ho Chang asked if she had brought the refined stone powder. Fan Xing wasn't going to concede anything to him, and so he asked where her demonic spiritual pills were. At that time, many magic swords appeared around Ho Chang. They swirled around him, while the guy himself looked up, raising more and more swords. Then the same swords pointed their sharp ends at the girl, Ho Chang, although he was wearing a mask. But one could tell from his eyes that he was smiling broadly and snidely as he asked the elder if she thought she could stand up to him with her cultivation, given that this was not a ghost market. Fan Xing called him a boy and told him not to play with her, saying that if he decided to go on the attack, he should be prepared for the consequences. In fact, Fan Xing started to get nervous, calling Hu Qing a bastard and wondering if he was going to rob a thief. Ho Chang asked the girl what of it, saying that there are thousands of disciples in the sect. Let them just try to find him. He advised the elder to know her place. Fan Xing was well aware of the difference in strength and thus was still thinking about what to do, and Ho Chang kept telling her to hand over the refined stone powder and not get hurt. Fan Xing was silent. Then he decided to give it to him after all. Fang held out a pouch to Ho Chang, in which golden refined stone powder glistened. Ho Chang stretched out his hand, but he didn't take it yet. He only looked carefully inside the bag. That was when Fan Xing turned to Ho Chang by name and asked if he thought she didn't recognize him. This question left the guy shocked. Ho Chang abruptly stepped back. Now he and the girl stood at a certain distance, but the pouch remained in the hands of the protagonist. Ho Chang was still in a state of shock. He began to attack the girl. The very same swords flew at her. They rushed swiftly toward the girl's body. However, Fan Xing was still standing still while everything around him was plunged into chaos. What Fan Xing accomplishes by revealing Ho Chang's identity. How Fan Xing will cope with Ho Chang surpassing him by a whole level. We will find out in the next chapter. Fan Xing activated his spiritual energy and extended his finger straight towards the first sword blade. However, not one but a dozen enchanted swords flew at the girl at once. To Fan Xing's great surprise, he was not in a panic. He just stood there. The sword stabbed into Fan Xing's arm and blood immediately gushed out from there. But despite being wounded, the swords turned back. All around them were blue and yellow colors. It wasn't that simple. As another batch of swords flew at Fan Xing from Ho Chang's side, Ho Chang shouted, asking how she knew who he was. He still couldn't understand anything. Fan Xing held onto his bleeding finger and said that since he wanted a battle, asked if she should still answer. He began to pour that with her connections. Finding out who he was the easiest thing in the world. Fan asked, wondering if he thought it wasn't. The protagonist warned that if he touched her today, they would go looking for her tomorrow. And then, dreadfully, but Ho Chang would be too late to regret. Fan Xing was completely serious. This startled Ho Chang once again. His eyes opened wide. Fan Xing decided that he would probably have to pour more oil on the fire. He gathered his spiritual energy in his finger again. There it looked like a sun with a dozen rays. From there, the stolen sword appeared, and with it the terrible snakes that wrapped around it and hissed loudly. Ho Chang became scared and uncomfortable, shouting that she couldn't do this to him. The girl replied that she just wanted to make a deal, saying that as he had said, his cultivation was higher than hers, and what she lacked right now was a magical weapon. Fan Xing smiled and said that if they started fighting now, Ho Chang would only bring trouble on himself. He brought his hands together in a circle. Ho Chang was still in a state of shock. He just remained silent with his eyes wide open. He realized that he had been careless because he thought she was just an ignorant rich girl from a sect, so he had not expected her to reveal his identity. There was already a bunch of big snakes behind him, and a magical mage. Because of the golden spiritual energy, everything looked as if it was fire canoning the forest. Ho Chang realized that she would also be wielding a magical weapon. He figured she was well prepared. Then he sent his swords back from the girl. He bowed to her and told the older woman that he had been overly impatient. Sweat broke out on his face, and he kept asking her to forgive him. Ho Chang lowered his head and said that he apologized for his mistake, hoped she would forget about this offense, and decide to make a deal with him. Fan Xing replied to him not to cause confusion. The protagonist in the guise of a girl said that he was giving Ho Chang refined stone powder, and he was giving her demonic spirit pills. He tossed Ho Chang, who was a considerable distance away, a bag, and he tossed the girl demonic pills. Ho Ching deftly caught it and it was now in the guy's hands. When Ho Ching finally opened it himself, the girl asked is he still afraid to make a deal. The refined stone powder shone brightly with gold. Even through the bandage on his face, it could be seen that Ho Ching was smiling. He bowed to the girl and replied that he naturally believed her. Besides, the refined stone powder was rich in spiritual energy, definitely a real commodity. After saying those words, Fan Xing caught his red pouch with the promised demonic pills. Ho Ching said that he would just go with the flow. He asked the older woman not to take it personally. The girl thought about it at first and then said that he knew his place. He didn't cheat her with the demonic spiritual pills, and since he wanted to make a deal from the beginning, he shouldn't have made things so complicated. Then Fan Xing, in the guise of a beautiful girl, turned back and told his brother that his sister would give him some advice for the end. He advised Ho Ching to stop being so serious in the future, or sooner or later he would bring trouble on himself. Ho Ching rubbed the back of his head and thanked the old woman for teaching him. The guy was even a little embarrassed. He promised that he would definitely change and take the righteous path. Fan Xing started to walk away. Ho Chang watched the girl's footsteps. She carefully stepped with her delicate shoes on the stone path. As soon as Ho Ching blinked, the elder was no longer there. She had disappeared, which stunned Ho Chang once again. He was finally able to remove his white bandage from his face, thinking that she had a quite ordinary cultivation base, but she would elusively disappear every time. His face turned slightly blue and sweat dripped down his forehead as he wondered who she was. If she could not only obtain the refined stone powder but also recognize his identity. Ho Ching decided that when he returned, he should ask his sister mentor to find out her identity. The golden flying sword that she used was very striking to Ho Ching's eyes. He remembered how the flames enveloped the girl's body, and 9 small snakes were coiling around the sword. The whole thing looked like a living hell. Suddenly, Ho Ching thought that he had heard of this sword somewhere. That was when he remembered that Sister Mentor had mentioned that a few months ago, there was a thief in the sect who had stolen a flying sword from the ghost market. He buried his hand in panic and refined stone powder, wondering if it was. The powder lay on Ho Ching's hand and shone brightly. However, he was getting smaller and smaller. A terrible thing happened. Ho Ching turned blue and asked if the stone powder was disappearing. He couldn't believe his eyes. Then he shouted at the top of his voice that she was a bloody thief, asking how she dared to cheat him, shouting that he would kill her. Third-grade demonic spiritual pill. Successfully refined their inner third-grade demonic beast pill with 9 kinds of elixirs. Contains spiritual energy, suitable for cultivators at the spiritual shift stage. Fan Xing's cottage shrouded the night. Fan Xing himself sat on his bed and scrutinized the demonic purple pill. He knew that he could very well break through to the 3rd level of spiritual shift with them, but he didn't know how to use them at all. The protagonist also knew that these elixirs weren't refined the same as spirit stones, but they were the same as stones after all. He decided to try to devour them. Fan Xing threw 4 pills into his mouth at once. He thought of the yin-yang gods and demons mirror. Then before Fan Xing stood the method of consumption. Place on the tip of the tongue, adjust the breathing, and by no means swallow, otherwise it would become difficult to contain the spiritual energy, after which the body might explode. But it was too late. Fan Xing swallowed the pills and tiredly held his full stomach. Suddenly, he felt sick and closed his mouth and his eyes opened wide. Tears came out in his eyes and he had to grab his throat. The boy was choking. Everything around started to turn black and blue, and the main character was trying to get the pills out of his throat. He cursed the book for not being able to tell him this sooner. The kid had something going on inside him. A little while later, lightning started flying in the cabin and burning poor Fan Xing's body. Everything around was in a terrible mess. His pupils rolled behind Fan Xing's eyelids, and his skin turned red and began to let off steam. His hair was scorched too. It lay in waves on the bed. Then he fell backward painfully himself. The protagonist was nightmarishly hot, sweat dripping down his body and warm air rising up. Fan Xing cursed everything and everyone. Fan Xing's eyes began to slowly close. They were still open, but just a little bit. Fan Xing's consciousness was falling somewhere down. The poor protagonist wondered how he could have made such a stupid mistake. There were several coffins flying over the planet, in space, all surrounded by auras, but only one, in the middle, was glowing with a red light. The coffin was luxurious, with many carvings, and the red aura against the tail of constellations and the Milky Way looked like a miracle. Suddenly, something started to happen to him. The other coffins were thrown aside by the shockwave that occurred from the coffin with the red aura. Then that same coffin lost weightlessness and flew to Earth. It looked just like a meteorite and flew with incredible force and speed. The coffin finally traversed the atmosphere and flew through the air of Asia, leaving behind a plume of fire. There was a small temple below. The leaves on all the trees around it rustled from the shockwave of the flying coffin. Inside the temple, an elder, the guy who gave out spirit stones to the main characters group, Group D, was sitting quietly meditating in silence. When he felt the shockwave, the elder opened his eyes and was quietly glad that history had finally made its move. Fan Xing felt as if he had fallen once. He was falling deeper and deeper down somewhere. Fan Xing even thought that he was dying. This made the protagonist very sad. The town in which he lived was enveloped in night. A modest month was visible in the sky and illuminated the entire village. The protagonist was still lying on his bed. He was not conscious, but his body was shaking and emitting steam. The poor guy was terribly hot. Sweat appeared on his face and his body was all red, as if burned. The coffin rushed toward the town like a meteorite, leaving the same fiery plume behind it. Some student was sitting in his room in the middle of the night reading magazines. His window was open, and when he saw something flying and burning outside his window, he was shocked and confused. The stunned boy leaned out of the window to get a better look. He saw fire and incredible speed. The guy asked in a trembling voice what else it was. Fan Xing was still lying on the bed as well, only now his spiritual energy appeared around him. The poor boy curled up and groaned in pain. Then Fan Xing still turned around and leveled himself on the bed, his body still shaking and burning. His eyes were firmly closed. He thought he saw his hands in front of him, but no fire or heat. Something soft and pink, petals. Everything around was in pink sap. It was quiet and peaceful and gentle. Fan Xing was sitting in the arms of some long-haired woman. He felt just as bad, and she stroked his head gently, soothing him. Fan Xing finally opened one eye and looked at the woman. So far, everything was blurred in his eyes. The woman too. She turned to the boy, said that 3,000 zhang gray hair a sign of his spiritual transformation, said that by reversing the spiritual veins, tempering the spirit and transforming qi, devouring the earth and eating the heavens. Fan Xing wondered about the supreme spiritual transformation. He closed his eyes again, squinting them hard. Then he opened it and sighed in surprise, a look of shock on his face. Fan jumped up on his bed and called out to his mom. That woman was his mom. The sun had already come out outside the window. It was morning. Fan Xing examined himself and asked his mother in a trembling voice, didn't he really die? The protagonist was truly perplexed. A little while later, Fan activated his spiritual energy and realized that he was at the peak of the second level of spiritual shift. Then he thought about it and said to himself, it seemed that not only did he not explode and die, but he had successfully absorbed the 4 demonic spirit pills. He asked if it was all thanks to the yin-yang mirror of gods and demons. There was a huge puddle of sweat on the bed underneath and around him. Fan Xing also thought of that woman. He could not fully see her face. He asked himself why he called her mom. Is she really his mom? Suddenly, Fan Xing heard his name being called, asking if he was still asleep, shouting that he had come for a drink. Fan Xing made the most displeased face possible and realized that it was the fatty who had come. Fan jumped off the bed and yelled that he was coming and stopped yelling. Then the frowning Fan Xing opened the door and asked Senior Yu why the hell he had come again. He said that they had just been drinking yesterday and asked if Yu San Liang had gone crazy. Yu San Liang was surprised and asked what yesterday meant. He said that Fan Xing had not been outside for a few days, asking if the little guy was completely crazy from sleep. Fan Xing rubbed the top of his head and replied that he had completely forgotten, saying that it was most likely all due to intense concentration on cultivation, telling him that he had fallen asleep so soundly that he had slept for days. They both walked inside. The older man had food and a drink in his hands. Then Yu San Liang turned blue in disgust and said that it was a terrible stench. He asked if Fan Xing was wetting the bed. Yu San Liang's stench made him feel as if he had thrown up a rainbow. He felt just awful in this room. Fan Xing couldn't smell anything, so he asked about the stench and sniffed. He already wanted to say something. However, he smelled that nightmarish odor. He felt as horrible as Yu San Liang. The view ahead was stunning. The sun was setting behind the mountains. Clouds gusted through the air. A strong river was happening through the mountains and hills. A mist descended on the jungle. Everything looked like the truest fairy tale. Fan Xing bathed in the clear river. He finally felt good, felt alive. Fan spat out some water and realized that it was true. After all, that cultivation brings out everything impure. He decided that it was probably because he had been practicing so hard. He thought about the fact that that refinement technique called higher spiritual transformation was automatically embedded in his mind. Fan decided that he should try it out again when he returned. Thanks to it, he had escaped from the clutches of death. Junior Fan shouted that the room had been cleaned 3 times and his clothes had been washed, and therefore he could already go back. The river in the sunset looked incredible. The naked Fan Xing immediately rushed towards his house, not forgetting to grab his cape. He and Yu Sanliang clinked saucers of wine. Yu Sanliang was already under the influence of alcohol. He hugged Fan Xing's shoulder and shouted that he didn't think the little demon kid would wet the bed. He laughed and said that there was nothing wrong with it. He used to pee every day when he was Fan Xing's age. Fan Xing replied that he had already told his elder that he didn't wet the bed. Yu Sanliang poured another portion of wine and told his junior not to worry, because he wouldn't tell anyone anyway. He was known for keeping his mouth shut. Fan Xing insultingly asked if Yu Sanliang himself believed this. He looked at his comrade disdainfully. Yu Sanliang didn't answer him anything to that, but he remembered that he wanted to tell him that while Junior Fan was napping in the room, something important happened. It wasn't that Fan Xing really liked being in the drunken Yu's arms, but he asked if this was something important at least related to Ho Qing, who the elder had recently talked about. Yu Sanliang was surprised that Fan Xing had guessed so quickly, shouting that the junior had guessed so accurately. The elder said that a few days ago, one of the victims of the ghost market robber had informed Ho Qing that robber was hiding among the outer disciples. Now Ho Qing was going around each one. Yu Sanliang said that upon hearing this, Ho Qing became very angry and decided to stand up for justice, using his own resources to find the thief among the outer disciples. Fan Xing didn't answer anything at first, but he realized to himself that justice was definitely not about Ho Qing and he was a pretender. The manager said that Ho Qing created 2 portraits of the robbers and started to show on every corner, but the search did not yield anything. He also said that he heard that thief can change his appearance, and he thinks his true identity is a girl. Said Ho Qing thought that the thief liked to disguise himself, so he gathered people and began to take them to the houses inside the valley to look for clues. Yu Sanliang added that Fan Xing's house was also searched, but at that moment, he was sleeping like a dead pig and doesn't know anything. Yu Sanliang also thought that the room still stinks terribly. He took up his wine saucer again. Yu Sanliang's words horrified poor Fan Xing. He realized that he kept thinking what was missing in the house. There was a bag missing, a red beautiful bag that contained demonic pills. There were 2 huts up ahead, Fan Xing's hut and Yu Sanliang's hut. They were still very different in neatness, but Fan Xing was already doing better. In Fan Xing's house, there was a pile of clothes and other accessories lying on the floor beside the bed. Fan Xing himself was sitting under the bed, holding the heavy and large furniture on only one small shoulder. He looked around and under himself, telling himself that there was no under the bed either. The protagonist finally crawled out from under the bed and exhaled heavily. He said he had miscalculated famously. However, he still hoped they hadn't found him. Then he turned his attention to something. Ho Qing heavily slapped the table along with that very red bag with his hand, shouting that they were trash, that they were all trash. The guy was clearly very angry. The bag was filled with something. Ho Qing turned all blue with rage. He shouted that no matter how many times he told them to inspect everything carefully, all in vain. Now he was sitting on his wooden throne and holding a sack in his hands. Said they just found the clue and they claimed to him that they don't remember where they got it from. The 3 guys stood there blushing. The lowliest of them bowed to the young master and said that he had told them to focus on finding the flying sword, and this bag was out of the question. Besides, they had picked it up by chance. He said it was just mixed in amongst the magical artifacts they found, saying they had no idea why he attached such importance to an ordinary bag. Ho Qing loudly shouted that enough of this. Then he pulled himself together and told them to go away. The men obeyed the young master. They had already started to walk out the open door. The guys had almost crossed the threshold of Ho Qing's chambers when he shouted for them to wait. They turned around and Ho Qing told them not to call him that anymore, saying that although they were sent by the clan, they had joined the sect and become official disciples, and therefore it would not be good if someone heard them addressing him, suggested that they call him elder brother. This surprised and not that the trio liked it, but they remained silent. Then they folded their hands as they should, and said well, first calling him young gentleman, and then sharply correcting himself. After that, Ho Qing once again ordered them to leave, only this time he did so with a gesture. Someone came out from behind and stood behind Ho Qing's back. The guys had already left, and this someone asked what he was so angry about. This someone turned out to be an indescribably beautiful girl in an equally luxurious dress. She said that it was hardly the matter of that bag. The girl was smiling as if she was glowing, and Ho Qing himself was looking at his own hand sadly. He called the girl Qingxue and told her that she understood so well what he was worried about, said that he had just received a talisman with the sex order. Qingxue was surprised and asked from where. She also added that he should know that a talisman with an order was certain death with little chance of surviving, let alone that monster. Ho Qing looked at her with unhappy eyes and replied that he was well aware of how dangerous he was, but this was the only way to get the breakthrough pill. Xing came closer and stroked the guy's head, saying why don't they think of other ways, saying that there should still be a way out. Ho Qing looked at the girl. Then he put his hand on her arms and told her that he was afraid his family wouldn't give him any more time. Ho Qing almost cried, promising that once he was done with it, he would have to break through as soon as possible. Xing apologized to Ho Qing, saying that it was all because of her. Ho Qing smiled smugly and stepped forward a little. He told her not to worry, saying that he had his own ways and would definitely come back in one piece. Above the horizon could be seen the incredible beauty of the red sun. It illuminated everything with orange light, creating a beautiful view of nature. There were also high and sharp cliffs. Birds flew up in the evening, looking for a night's lodging. A fog descended on the evening jungle. Fan Xing rummaged through his things again. He was persistently searching for something. Suddenly, someone knocked on his door. Fang turned around at the sound and shouted, asking who was there. Fan Xing made a small slit and seeing who was there, came to a shock. He wondered how he was. Now the protagonist opened the front doors wide. A man in an apprentice uniform stood in front of him. The protagonist turned to Senior Lu, asking if he had come to take revenge on him before his wounds had healed. Fan Xing smiled widely and smugly. Then Senior Lu also smiled. He told him that it wasn't him who was looking for him. The senior to Fan Xing had business. Senior Lu pointed his finger behind his back. Fan Xing had no idea who the senior was talking about yet. Then from behind Lu's back, Ho Qing came out. He said, meaning he is Fan Xing. Fan Xing began to feel a little worried that Ho Qing had found him so quickly. He had already grabbed the knife that was always sticking in his belt behind his back. Fan Xing was ready to attack and defend. Ho Qing kindly looked down at Fan Xing and asked what his cultivation level was. Senior Lu also smiled silently, but standing on crutches. Fan Xing didn't answer and then Ho Qing had to tell the brat that he was asking him. The protagonist stood with his head down. He confirmed that he was Fan Xing and lied about being at the first level of spiritual shift right now. Ho Qing squinted his eyes and turned blue again, saying that the level was low. After that, Senior Lu whispered to Ho Qing that if he were to take anyone as an assistant, it would be someone with a low level. Besides, he wanted to say something else, but Ho did not let him finish and said that Lu was right to say that he would take this kid. Now he was looking at Fan Xing with anger. Ho Qing tossed the protagonist a sack with something inside and told the kid that he had received a talisman with the sex order. He would leave tomorrow morning and Fan Xing would go with him. Fan Xing caught the sack. When he opened it, saw 2 spiritual energy stones there. Ho Qing told him not to worry, there would be no losers, promised that Fan Xing would receive a separate reward from him. Fan Xing shoved the knife back into place with relief and thought that it looked like he hadn't been spotted after all. And seeing Ho Qing now, the protagonist thought that he had completely forgotten about what was outside the sect. Fan Xing thanked the elder for his kindness, but said that the younger one was still too weak and therefore would only be a hindrance on the way. In fact, Fan Xing just thought that despite all this, there must be a reason why he was calling him specifically. Thought it might be due to the sex restrictions. Suddenly, Senior Lu grabbed the little guy by the scruff of his neck and shouted to Junior Fan that Senior Ho had paid attention to him, that he should already consider himself lucky. Senior Lu shook him with all his might and advised him not to be impudent. Fan Xing was shaking all over and Lu was sweating. He was worried about that bastard Fan Xing not making the elder uncomfortable. Fan pulled a wide smile on his face and said that since he had been chosen, it was fine. He said he'd go. Of course he would. Fan Xing stood in front of the 2 elders and smiled. Lu finally let him go. Senior Lu looked at Fan Xing with disdain and incomprehension, and Ho Qing folded his arms and said, "That's better." Now he was smiling again. The city was shrouded in sunset. Everything around was golden. Senior Lu stood with Ho Qing in a place empty of visitors and counted the coins in the bag. Ho Qing told him that he hoped he could keep his mouth shut if he didn't want to become a laughingstock for everyone. He said it coldly and indifferently. Lu replied that the elder had nothing to worry about, and he was only a boy with no skills or connections. No one would miss him. The elder smiled widely. All because of the gold coin shining brightly in the sack in his hands. As night fell, the entire town could hear Junior Fan being asked if he took the sex order talisman as a joke, shouting that even if 3 third-level spiritual shift disciples were accepted, the probability of failure would be extremely high, and besides, failure in the task was death. It was Yu Sang Liang. He was sitting at the main character's house and had been drunk for a long time. The older man asked how long Fan Xing had been in the sect. Why would that guy take him with him right after receiving the talisman? Yu Sang Liang thought that there was obviously something wrong. Fan Xing was calmly drinking his wine. Then Senior Yu got a little angry or just became more serious. He told Junior Fan to listen to him, saying that he shouldn't go with Ho Chang, otherwise he definitely wouldn't run away from trouble. The protagonist finally replied that he already understood that Lu Feng had brought Ho Ching to use him for his own nefarious purposes, saying that only he would never dare to follow Ho Ching given his cultivation base, even if he said he wouldn't go. Did Yu Sanliang really think that they would have left things as they were? Fan Xing was completely aware and serious in his statements. Yu Sangliang's wine saucer displayed his dissatisfied and sad face. Yu Sangliang understood very well that there was nothing they could do about it. They were the weak link right now. Fan Xing cheered up. He stood up and said that these people were literally forcing him to go with them. He asked, did the sect not care at all? Yu Sanliang replied that the sect only wants as many people as possible to gather at their behest. He asked Fan Xing to tell him why the breakthrough pill was being held so tightly here, asking if it was not to force the disciples to plow for the benefit of the sect. The elder told him that even if Junior Fan died outside, everyone would assume that it happened during the mission. The elder's saucer was already empty, and he kept saying that they had no support or experience, and therefore no one would care about their lives. Fan Xing looked terribly sad and droopy, and Yu Sanliang remembered something else. Yu Sanliang began to speak more quietly. He said that there was one way, which was that Fan Xing could escape, and if he could not be found, they would only have to surrender. This surprised and interested Fan Xing. He asked with wide open eyes how to escape. Senior Yu said that in fact, he knows one secret passage that leads straight to freedom. It is located in the bamboo forest on the east side of the valley. Said that it was through this secret channel that he transmitted elixirs. He said that it was during his time as the head of the handyman department. Yu Sangliang said all this with a terribly serious face. Fan Xing listened to his buddy attentively as he spoke further. He revealed that Ho Ching and Lu could set up surveillance to prevent him from escaping this night, but they don't know about this secret passage. The protagonist thought deeply about escaping. A little while later, he thanked Senior Yu for his help but said that he wasn't going to run away. Now Fan Xing looked cheerful and confident again. His statement startled Yu Sanliang. He replied in surprise that this was not the time to be a daredevil. Then Fan Xing told him that he were from different backgrounds and therefore he simply wouldn't understand him. The protagonist turned his back on his buddy. He looked out the window saying that in this world the strong eat the weak, so there is no point in hiding. A large bird with massive wings flew in the sky. Fan Xing knew that hope only appears when we come face to face with it. The bird was an eagle with naturally incredibly clear and good eyesight. He looked through everything with his yellow eyes. Finally morning came. The air was still cool after the night, but the sun was already starting to warm. A pumped-up, strong horse was rushing somewhere, kicking up a cloud of dust along the way. The horse was not alone. There were 4 of them. Ho Ching sat on one of them and his servants sat on the others. All of them were in high spirits. The other 2 disciples watched them moving away. One disciple told the other that Senior Bertaho had really accepted the sect's order. He deserved to be the leader of the outer disciples. The other added that he heard he had arrived to take some kid with him. The disciple wondered who was so lucky. A little while later, Ho Chang and his team arrived at their destination. The horse braked sharply, raising a cloud of dust. The door of the cabin ahead swung open. It was Fan Xing's cabin, and from there, the protagonist walked out. Now standing right in front of Ho Ching, Fan Xing calmly watched him. The boy didn't feel old at all, or he didn't show it. Ho Ching looked up at the boy and told him to get ready and saddle the horse, because they were already leaving. Fan Xing somehow felt that this guy had changed since yesterday, but he didn't understand what the reason was. Ho Ching looked at Fan Xing carefully. Not far from them stood a whole group of people. One of the guys in the group incredulously asked if Big Brother Ho was going to take the kid with him. Ho Ching was sitting high on a horse, and the main character was at most the length of a horse's leg. Another guy asked if the kid had any support in the sect, saying that he hadn't heard of anything like that. Yu Sanliang was also watching Junior Fan and was terribly worried about his buddy. From behind, Senior Lu started to approach Senior Yu, which scared Yu Sanliang a bit. Lu turned to the fatty, told him that the small one was gone and he was next, telling him not to worry, for he would have a good time with him. Soon, all the guys were already on their horses. Fan Xing was sitting behind some man. Ho Ching was in front of everyone. He was taking some yellow book from one of the sect disciples. The guy who handed him the book said that Junior had come to wish Senior Ho and his company a good journey. Ho Ching coldly replied that it was a matter of course and they left, while the disciple remained standing in his seat and stared after them. A little while later, they were already rushing on their horses. Fan Xing decided to ask Big Brother Ho why they left the sect in the first place. Ho confidently replied that of course to exterminate the demons. Asked if Junior was afraid. Ho Chung understood that Fan Xing was still just a child, and therefore it would be nothing for him to deceive the boy. Good thing he didn't know that it wasn't like that at all. Fan Xing made unhappy frightened eyes and asked what kind of demons. Then the man who was carrying him decided to intervene. He asked if the small man knew why no one had dared to take the talisman with the order this year. The man had a scar over one eye that no longer worked, as well as a long beard and thick hair. He did not wait for Fan Xing to answer, and so he simply replied that it was because the target of the punitive expedition in this go. The man paused for a moment, and then said that the target was a Class 4 monster, a terrifying haggard python. They were now traveling through the beautiful Rocky Mountains. It had already gotten dark. The month had entered the sky. Now Ho Ching's group was sitting by the fire in the forest, and the 4 horses were standing beside them. They crouched down to rest. The bonfire blazed with yellow fire and made loud noises, crackling. The man with the scar was drinking something from a large tankard. Fan Xing sat beside him, thinking about something. He looked up. The scarred man noticed that there was something wrong with him, so he asked what was wrong. Was he afraid of fighting snakes and frogs? Fan Xing really did look scared. The protagonist actively shook his head and shouted that respect and honor are achieved in risk, and he was not afraid at all. In fact, it was a blatant lie. Suddenly, a man's tankard flew into Fan's hands. Much to his surprise, the man smiled and explained that wine was a great thing. He told the Fan to take a couple sips and the fear would immediately recede. Fan Xing sat up a little surprised and looked at the man. Then he closed his eyes and pulled himself together. The guy took a couple sips of wine after all. Fan Xing was skewered by the acrid taste of wine. The man patted him on the back and everyone else laughed off him. Then Ho Ching said that they were going to the mountains tomorrow, so they shouldn't drink too much and go to bed early. The 2 boys wanted to say well and call him young master, but again corrected themselves sharply on the older brother. Soon, Fan Xing was already sleeping on the ground, covered by something. He heard one of the guys asking young master Ho Ching, is there really no other way out? Another guy asked Lu San, the man with the scar, if he had mellowed out because of the brat. Fan Xing woke up to hear everything more clearly. Lu San replied that Junior Fan had just arrived in the sect, and it seems that he is also being bullied there. Now he considers them as his patrons. He said that he liked this kid, if there is another way out. He was interrupted by Ho Ching saying that there was no other way. A huge rank 4 monster. He was saying that if they didn't prepare a bait for him, they wouldn't even have a chance of winning. Another guy turned to Lu San, pointed his finger at him and said that he had become more lenient, said that he didn't think he would stay the same after joining the sect. He said that he sacrificed this devil. They could avoid the risk. Asked why not then, shouted that Lu San should treat him like a dead man. Lu San felt lousy, but said that he was right and apologized for his soft-heartedness. Ho Ching asked Zhao Ji if he had prepared what he had asked for. Zhao Ji held out a thin, beautiful knife with an interesting shape to the gentleman. He told the young master that everything was ready, told him that this knife could disperse the sea of qi and cause spiritual energy to leak out. Zhao Ji smiled sneakily, said that tomorrow he would pierce 18 acupuncture points on him, after which his blood would mix with spiritual energy. Fan Xing heard all the plans regarding his body. Sweat broke out on the forehead of the protagonist. Someone said that the monster liked to devour humans and especially virgin cultivators the most. Another said that when the brat started screaming in pain, the monster would take the bait. They all sat around the fire as well. Ho Ching said it was great, but advised not to take it so lightly because the mountain was not so easy. All the boys agreed with the young gentleman. Ahead was a mysterious and somewhat awe-inspiring rocky mountain. The sun began to roll out from behind the horizon and illuminate everything around it. Fan Xing was kicked hard and yelled for the little guy to get up sooner. The protagonist didn't like this awakening. However, he had to sit up, stretch a little, and rub his eyes to wake up sooner. Meanwhile, Hua Chang and the others were already getting ready to move out, rolling up their sleeping bags. Fan Xing finally stood up and asked the scarred man if they would ride the horses. Lu San replied that there was a mountain of beast miasmas ahead and riding on it would be inconvenient, so they were walking. Fan Xing asked what other mountain of beast miasmas were. Lu San told him that he was just a child and apparently didn't know that she was very famous. He said that it was said that hundreds of years ago, a huge monster had settled here. It was later killed by the practitioners in the Faline cave, but it had died. After that battle, abundant spiritual power began to accumulate, so 3rd and 4th rank transformation stage monsters began to continuously appear here, and a mountain was formed. The python was really an incredible size. Its head alone was as big as 4 adult humans. Lu San told me that the pythons and the frog they had recently made were some of them. All the monsters are terribly huge. said that the mountain of beast miasmas along with the roaming creatures were incredibly dangerous. If you make a mistake, you're doomed. Fan Xing listened to the man carefully, and then replied that it was simply amazing. Right now the main character didn't look scared at all, on the contrary involved. Lu San was a little surprised at his reaction. He turned around to the boy, while Fan Xing on the contrary looked towards the mountain. Suddenly, a wine jar flew into his hands again, which Fan Xing was again surprised by. Lu San said to hold the bag of alcohol at his place, saying that if he came back alive, we'll learn to drink. He turned around and left. Zhaoxi shouted Lu San's name and then asked what he was stuck there. He and the third guy and Ho Qing had already packed for the road and were waiting for Lu San and Fan Xing. Lu San had already moved a couple of meters away and then told the younger one that it was time to go, and there was still a long way to go. Fan Xing was still standing pillar to post and holding the tankard in his hands. Then he smiled sincerely and thanked Senior Lu, the sun beautifully illuminating his hair. The protagonist ran to the others. His mood had lifted greatly. Now the forest didn't seem scary and dangerous like last night. Now it was bright and green. Bloody bones flew down. They were bones from different parts of the body, vertebrae and knees. Along with the bones flew shreds of clothing, all of it flying into a terrifying pile. A purple aura flying around. Bones were flying from the mouth of a large python. It had already eaten quite a number of people, and there were also skulls lying around. A large python wrapped its body around a sharp corner of the cliff. It was perfectly visible from the top of the mountain. Then the already huge python was crushed by an even bigger frog. One of its legs was enough to take the life of a cold-blooded mammal. The frog was yellow in color and emitted an incredibly strong aura of purple color. From the impact, the python opened its mouth and hissed loudly. The frog had red eyes and some sort of 5 red bumps on its forehead, now sitting calmly on the python's corpse. Something started to happen to the bumps on my forehead. In fact, they felt the same as a cat's whiskers. Someone was deftly cutting the heavy, sharp and thick vines. It was Ho Qing and his team. There were an awful lot of vines, and so swords were excellent at helping them trample their way through. It was a clear morning again. There were many clouds in the sky, but they were snow white and the sun easily broke through them. There was no hint of rain. The boys were dying of heat. It was exhausting them terribly. Zhaoxi tried to help himself by covering his face with his hands. Only Ho Qing himself and Lu San were still feeling more or less. Fan Xing was also feeling lousy. Ho Qing was still trampling their path with his mighty sword. The sword thundered into the dry ground. It was the third guy's sword. He was getting up, leaning on his not-so-cold weapon anymore. He asked why it was so hot in this hole, sweat streaming down his face. Suddenly Zhaoxi turned to him, calling him Qian Tong. He pointed his hand somewhere forward and told him to look there. The river showed up ahead. The water was clear and brightly reflecting the blue sky and sunlight. Zhaoxi turned to the young master. He said that they had been climbing the Beast Miasma mountain for several days. It was already quite close. He asked if they could rest here. Ho Qing remained silent for now, while Zhaoxi stood behind him and poured another batch of sweat. Something rustled in the leaves of the trees. Then he did agree. He offered to stop. Ho Qing was thinking about something. Zhaoxi was terribly pleased by the young master's indulgence, and therefore thanked him profusely. The tired Fan Xing spat on the ground and waved his hands to cool down a bit. Lu San stopped beside him and smiled. Chen Tong and Zhaoxi cheerfully ran towards the water, shouting that this weather was the best time to bathe and wash off their stinky sweat. Unexpectedly for Qian Tong, someone stopped him with his hand. He turned back in surprise to see what had happened. Before he could do anything about it, a fist flew into his face. He was now lying on the ground and Lu San was sitting on top of him. Zhaoxi was stunned and stood with his mouth wide open. Qian Tong couldn't understand at all what was going on after all. Then he finally realized that he had been punched in the face and became very angry. He raised his head and asked if Lu San had lost his mind. Lu San seriously looked up at him and said that he was the one who was stupid, asking if Qian Tong wanted to die. Qian Tong shouted that he wouldn't be intimidated by him, asking what could be dangerous in such a clear river. Lu San finally got up from Qian Tong's back and called him a goon. Qian Tong still remained lying on the grass as well. Lu San grabbed his sword. He pulled it loudly from the pouch on his belt. Then he swung it sharply and slashed at something alive that most likely wanted to attack them. Now this green something of small size was now lying in Lu San's hand. Only there was only one half of it. It had blue eyes without pupils and something that looked like a green husk. Lu San threw the killed animal into the water and told Qian Tong to watch carefully. The animal spat into the clear water. Soon it surfaced and a red liquid began to form under the water. A little while later, the animal had completely dissolved into the water. Only a red shiny spot remained. Qiantong said that nothing was going on. He finally got up from the ground and lost the arm he had hit hard. Lu San looked at him and smiled. It turned out that Qiantong had made his announcement early. A bunch of piranhas had swarmed onto the beast's pool of blood. They all intended to tear apart the remains of the beast and eat it. Qiantong turned blue from the horror of what he saw. He couldn't find the words to describe this nightmare. Soon the water was splashing in all directions. The piranhas were cruel and ruthless to the unfortunate beast. The water was stained bright red with spilled blood. Zhao Che saw all this along with the others. The poor fellow was plunged into sheer terror. He screamed and asked what it was. That was when Lu San explained that they were fish monsters imbued with a demonic aura, saying that usually their bodies were transparent, and therefore you couldn't notice them with the naked eye. Zhao and Qian listened to the man in astonishment. Lu San kept saying that one should enter the water. These things would immediately start hunting, their bodies turning blood red like this. The fishmongers looked nightmarishly intimidating. Lu San said that the fish themselves were not that scary. Their strength was in numbers. They were very cruel, saying that even humans and monsters with high cultivation had a hard time escaping from their swarm attacks. Within minutes, only bones were left of the beast. The scarred man shouted that if they entered the water, only bones would be left of them. Zhao Ji and Qiantong were truly stunned and shocked. Cold sweat washed over their bodies now. Ho Cheng calmly sat leaning on a thick tree. He said that before Lu San was accepted into the clan, he was the only hunter to return alive from the beast Miasma Mountain, saying that was why the clan sent Lu San to help him. Ho also said that if they didn't want to die in a place like this without a good reason, they should listen to Lu San. Zhao Ji and Qiantong bowed and pardoned the young master. After that, Ho Cheng asked Lu San to approach him. Lu San sat down next to him, close to Ho Cheng. He told the man that they would soon reach the place and he should keep a close eye on the little guy. Told him to try not to fail at the last moment. Lu San turned towards Fan Xing, glanced at him and told the young master that that boy was an ordinary child, which was why he was wondering why he was so vigilant all the way. The main character was lazily yawning in the background. Ho Cheng seriously replied to him that the matter was of special importance, and therefore caution wouldn't hurt, so Lu San should keep an eye on him. Said that in addition, he understood why Lu was so soft on him, but let him not do anything that would turn out badly for their mission. Now Ho Cheng actually looked intimidating. He was clearly threatening Lu San. Ho Cheng also told the man not to forget about his younger brother. Lu San became a little sad, but he replied to the young master that he remembered everything. Now he didn't look at Ho Cheng's eyes. The morning was clear and clean. The trees swayed in the breeze and birds took to the sky. Fan Xing was still sitting by the tree as well. He noticed Lu San approached him and smiled widely at him. He asked Big Brother Lu what he was talking to Senior Ho about. Lu San turned away from him and replied that it was nothing of the sort, saying that they were close to their goal. He would walk the rest of the way, looking after Fan Xing. Then he turned his back on the protagonist altogether and said that the time of rest would soon come to an end, and therefore Fan should prepare for the road. Said that they were leaving in the evening. Lu San was shaking all over, and a purple aura was flying around. Fan Xing noticed something amiss. All the trees were in a translucent purple aura. Ho Cheng's group was walking through the already evening forest. They could see that everything was imbued with an aura. Fan Xing walked smoothly and thought that once they reached their destination, they could take him on. Lu San was right behind him. Fan Xing realized that he needed to figure out how to escape. Soon, they were already walking on a small plain. Zhao Ji and Qiantong were already very tired. Ho Cheng turned around to see how they were doing. Then he told him to get ready. The battle was coming soon. Zhao Ji smiled widely and sneakily, took out a sharp knife and told the young master not to worry, for he had long since been ready. He was still smiling broadly and glanced at the target. Fan Xing. Fan Xing thought about the fact that they aren't even hiding. It's so obvious. Everyone stopped abruptly and Ho Cheng said that there was a swamp ahead, so they should take a detour. The swamp was large and somehow cracked. It had a brown swampy color. Ho Cheng's group started to go around the large swamp. Qiantong even had to cover his nose with his hand from such a horrible stench. Fan Xing was walking quite near the swamp, but he wasn't as uncomfortable as Qiantong. Suddenly, the handle that was hanging on the shoulder of the protagonist and holding the bottle broke apart. The canteen, along with Fan Xing, flew into the muddy swamp. A piece of ground, on which the main character was still standing, broke away from the rest of the piece due to moisture. Fan Xing's eyes opened wide in horror. Now he was flying straight into the swamp, and he could not yet fully understand what had happened. Zhao Ji and Qiantong were astonished and offended. They shouted at young master Ho Cheng that the brat had gone down. Fan Xing was already half submerged in the swamp. He called out loudly to Big Brother Ho and Big Brother Lu, asking for their help. The protagonist did not want to stay in this swamp at all. Ho Chang was angry. He clenched his teeth and hissed at such a crucial moment. Unexpectedly, Fan Xing's hand was grabbed. Seeing Brother Lu, Fang was actually overjoyed. Lu-san was lying on the ground, so that it wouldn't crack as well as under Fan Xing, so he could spread his weight over a larger area. The man shouted for Fang Fan to stay still, explaining that the more he moved, the more he would be sucked in. Then he turned to Zhao and Qian, asking why they were standing there like stumbling blocks. He shouted for them to hold his legs and pull him out. Those reluctantly agreed. Soon, all their bags were already lying on the ground around. Lu-san was still performing the same role. While Zhao Ji and Jinton were pulling him by one leg, Lu-san shouted for Junior Fan to grab onto him. Finally, Fan's body began to climb out of the swamp. Soon he was lying on the grass, on the bank, opposite the scarred man, all very tired after such activity. Zhao Ji and Qianton covered their noses again from the unpleasant smell. They resented how much the small one smelled. Ho Qing was silent for now. He just looked at Junior Fan unhappily. Fan Xing was still trying to recover and catch his breath while standing on all fours, and Ho Chang stood beside him. Then the protagonist raised his head, smiled out of his last strength, and thanked Senior Lu for saving his life. Something cut the air with a nightmarishly fast gust. Fan Xing was raked with a generous slap on the cheek. The poor boy didn't even realize what had happened. He was punched by the elder Lu, asking the younger what he was doing and whether he realized how much danger he was in, shouting that if he wasn't around, Fan Xing would be dead by now. Tears came to Fan's eyes. He rubbed his head and apologized. He said that just a bag of alcohol almost fell down there, saying that he was careless. Fan Xing promised that he would be more careful next time. He took hold of the bag of alcohol. Lu-san stood silently across from him. Then he turned around and said there would be no next time. The words made even himself sad. Zhao Ji and Qianton were sitting on the ground, somewhere among the trees, while Ho Ching stood nearby and looked somewhere in the distance. Then he spoke. He said that this was the end of it and they had not much left, so it was time to move on. Zhao Ji and Qianton lazily stood up. Lu-san was near Ho Chang, and Fan Xing was far behind. Some time later, they came to a shore with clear water. The view would have been beautiful if not for the pile of bones and remains left on the shore. Ho Ching said they have come. They are in place. He turned around to his group and asked Zhao Ji to come over here. Abruptly, someone asked them to wait. It was Fan Xing. He told the elders that he had to go to the bathroom, and asked if they would wait for him. Fan showed off with a jug. Ho Ching was lenient towards the child and said that it was the first time he was facing a monster, so it was normal to be nervous. He told Fan Xing that he could do it by the river, but he should be careful not to deliberately fall into the river, otherwise he would go to feed the monster fish. Fan Xing smiled widely and thanked the elder, promising to return soon. Then Ho Ching reminded Zhao Ji that he also wanted to go to the restroom and could go along with Fan Xing. He told the guy quieter and much more seriously that this was the right time and he couldn't screw up, asked if he understood. Zhao Ji stood with his back to Ho Ching. He smiled broadly in his usual manner and replied to the young master to be sure. Zhao Ji approached the younger Fan Xing and said he wanted to ask him something. He asked if he had parents, or maybe siblings. Fan Xing said no and told him that he had been an orphan since he was little. He asked what about the older man. He said that they had the same situation and he was in the same situation. Now they stood with their backs to the others and untied their belts. Zhao Ji smiled and said that in fact, he thought Fan Xing was a nice kid. He was better than the other brats who could only yell, saying that if he stayed in the sect longer, he could make a name for himself. Fan Xing blushed and smiled. Zhao Ji told Junior that Lu-san cared a lot about Junior, asked if he knew why. Fan Xing replied that he didn't. Then Zhao said that Lu-san has a younger brother, about the same age as Fan Xing, but he is seriously ill and no one can cure him. The older man said he thought Fan reminded him of a loved one. Fan Xing asked why he suddenly decided to tell him about it. Zhao Ji raised his head to the sky and asked, really why? Then he grabbed his knife and replied that it was probably because Fan Xing was about to die. He glared angrily at the younger man. Zhao Ji smiled sneakily and smugly, all because he had yet to notice that Fan Xing was no longer around. When he did notice it, he was greatly surprised and understood nothing. Before Zhao could do anything, Fan Xing stabbed his knife straight into his back. Zhao Ji's body arched violently from the sharp and unexpected pain. He shouted loudly. Fan Xing looked cold and heartless as blood spurted out. Zhao Ji scrolled his knife in his hand and was highly tense. He tried to attack the boy, yelling for him to get ready to die. Fan Xing blocked the guy's attack with his hand. holding his arm in his hand. Fan Xing abruptly raised his foot and fractured Zhao Zi's arm. It was simply an unbearable pain. Zhao Zi opened his mouth wide and flattened his eyes. Soon, Zhao Zi was already lying on the ground and twisting in pain, holding onto his broken arm, a pool of blood forming around him, while Fang calmly stood over him. The other three were shocked. Ho Qing became very angry, and Qian Tong drew his sword. Ho Qing activated his spiritual energy. A blue aura appeared around him. Magical flying swords swirled around his master. Then they headed straight for Fan Xing. The protagonist turned around sharply but silently. Swords stabbed into the ground around Fan, but not one had hurt him yet. Ho Qing was genuinely amazed that he dodged the flying sword. He shouted and asked how he did it. Drops of sweat appeared on his face. Fan's spiritual golden energy swirled around him, and he jumped and hit the ground beneath him. There was a small explosion accompanied by a bright light and a shockwave. Fan Xing flew toward Zhao Zi, who had already risen to his feet, and grabbed him, a cloud of dust rising behind the protagonist. Fan Xing picked up Zhao Zi and carried along with him. They fell into the water. A heavy splash went up. Qiantong and Lu San were stunned. The scarred man asked if he had jumped into the river, shouting that he was going to die together with Zhao Zi. Zhao Zi surfaced and looked around. Around him, because of the wound on his back, the water was colored red. From the bottom of the river, the monster fish were already rushing towards Zhao Zi, intent on tearing the guy apart as soon as possible. Zhao Zi was actually scared, because he had already seen what those fishes had done to the poor beast. He asked for help. Nothing could be done anymore. The fish monsters pounced on the guy. There were an awful lot of them. Qiantong watched the picture in horror, and Lu San started to say that Zhao's older brother, Ho Qing, was silent. In the sky above Zhao Zi, not a few big birds were flying. Zhao stretched out his injured hand and asked for help. Soon, the water calmed down. Only a pile of blood, Zhao Zi's skeleton, and clumps of his clothes remained there. Ho Qing was greatly tensed. He wondered, did this little guy really know what they were going to do to him? Lu San abruptly noticed and asked why only Zhao Zi's body was there. After these words, they saw a sight on the other side of the river. Fan Xing surfaced and spat out a lot of water. From the lack of oxygen, he was blushing. Qian Tong pointed his hand at the boy and shouted that he wasn't dead. He was terribly astonished by this. Fan Xing had almost reached the shore. He was leaning on his hands, but his feet were still in the water. The protagonist had made land after all. Now he was standing with his back to the other shore. His fist swung sharply through the air. Fang smiled widely and gave a thumbs down to the rest of the guys. Ho Qing was beyond angry, his face turning blue with rage. He asked how this damn brat survived. The sun was already setting over the horizon. All the nature around gilded, and a high rocky mountain could be seen ahead. Lu San was tied up, pointed a sword blade at him and ordered to speak. It was Qiantong. He was asking Fan Xing why the fish didn't attack this brat. Lu San was silent, and Qiantong shouted even louder and asked how he knew about their plan, shouting that it was Lu San who told him everything. Asking if that was not the case, Ho Qing sat in the back and silently looked at Lu San. Fan finally cried out that he sympathized with Fan Xing, but he would never betray his family. But why the fish didn't touch him, he himself would want to know. Qiantong shouted loudly for him to shut up. Everything he could think of started flying out of his mouth. He raised his sword high and asked if he thought the young lord would believe his false words. The sword flew towards Lu San with lightning speed. Lu San tensed up a lot, but he still wasn't hit by the sword. Ho Qing stopped Qiantong's attack, his flying sword circling around him again. Qiantong didn't understand the young master's action at all. Lu San himself was also extremely surprised. He had already prepared for the worst, hence he had long since bathed in his own sweat. Near his face was Ho Qing's flying sword. Ho Qing then said that Lu San really didn't betray the family. It was they who underestimated the boy. The rope that had been used to wrap around Lu San was now lying on the ground. Lu San was finally able to stand up. He and Qiantong realized something. They looked at the gentleman's hand. There were some bits of dirt. Ho Qing also focused on them. He said that he found them near where the boy had jumped into the lake. These chunks of dirt were glowing purple in color. Qiantong then realized that this was demonic chi, which surprised him greatly. Ho Qing replied that he was right. It was a piece of dirt with the demonic chi of the python toad, saying that since demonic energy was contained in the soil, it was usually hard to detect. One could only see it with spiritual energy. said that being a rank 4 demonic beast, the demonic chi of the python toad is quite capable of scaring away weaker creatures. Ho Qing suggested that this was how Fan Xing sat underwater and remained untouched, said that since the boy's body was covered in this mud, all the fishes were scared and chose not to touch him. Lu San asked the two of them to wait, hesitated and said that Fan Xing was covered in mud when he jumped into the lake. He didn't want to believe that. Ho Qing interrupted him and clenched his fist hard with anger. He said that right. This lake is the place where the python toad's energy is concentrated. He said that the boy must have known about the existence of demonic energy in the lake and that was why he jumped into it on purpose. Ho Qing said, "It seems like Junior had thought of everything in advance." Lu Sanya was horrified and amazed at the same time. He shouted that only to think that a child could have such scrupulous thinking. Ho said they were fooled by his mediocre appearance and let their guard down. Lu San silently lowered his eyes. He recalled the boy holding his bag of alcohol. As he stood across from him, that was when he told young Master Ho Qing that he was afraid that the boy had already escaped. He asked what they would do next if he no longer served as their bait. Ho Qing replied that it might not be that simple. Ho probably suspected something. Something greatly confused him about this whole story. Xian Tong didn't understand what the young master was talking about, and Lu San was somewhat glad that the boy had escaped. Hence any speculation on Ho Qing's part didn't please him much. Ho Qing replied Xian Tong that it was all about the expression on his face at the last second. Asked didn't the guy see? Ho said that it didn't look like he was going to escape at all. He remembered very well the fury with which Fan Xing clenched the piece of clothing in his teeth. Ho said that Fan Xing had the look of a vengeful beast, and it was true that at that time, despite his young age, Fan Xing was fearful. Meanwhile, Fan Xing was calmly kneading his hands on the shore. He told himself that the demonic chi was dissolving in the water faster than he thought, saying that if he couldn't swim fast, those damn fishes would rip his arm off. When Fong and the others passed by the swamp, he learned that the remnants of the python toad's excretions contained demonic chi and repelled demonic beasts below the 4th rank. The protagonist thought to himself that, however, this time everything worked out thanks to the Yin Yang Holy Book. It had long since gotten dark. A month was visible in the sky. Fan Xing was looking into the distance, but in fact, his attention was not on the night sky at all. He saw a tall pillar of smoke and light ahead. The protagonist smiled broadly slyly, gleaming white teeth, and told himself that they should just wait, because no one would go unpunished. The source of the smoke and light was the shelter of Ho Qing's group. Lu San and Xianton were already sleeping on sleeping bags around the fire. Ho Qing was sitting leaning against a tree. Fan Xing was sitting on a large branch of a big tree amidst a pile of leaves, holding a gleaming knife. The main character took a closer look and cheerfully but quietly said as expected, "They relaxed." At that time, Fan Xing moved down the tree. He deftly landed on the grass. Fan was confident in his intentions. He rushed forward straight to the target. However, it wasn't that simple. There was a string strung between the bushes right where Fan Xing ran through. By the time the protagonist discovered it, it was too late and he realized it. Abruptly, something slashed the boy's cheek. A small scratch appeared and blood rushed out. Fan Xing noticed that it wasn't Ho Qing sitting near the tree at all, but the most ordinary scarecrow. Fang said to himself that he was the one who had been careless. The boy blamed himself terribly for it. In the forest in that area, a purple aura was flying in that area. It turned out that the bags were also not guys but stuffed animals. Fan Xing was sad that this trap was so obvious and he didn't guess it. At that time, Ho Qing postured near the protagonist, his spiritual energy and a pair of flying swords swirling around him. Ho Cheng was clearly angry with Fan Xing. He ordered someone to block the boy's escape route and he would deal with him himself. Lu San and Xian Ton came out from behind him, the latter smiling sneakily, the other glaring menacingly at the boy. Lu San agreed with his young master while instilling a terrible fear. Shen Tong told Ho Qing that he was right. This boy really is looking for his death. After saying those words, Ho Qing pointed his flying swords at the protagonist. They rushed towards the target. Fan Xing was scared but was well aware that if he tried to escape, he would be pinned down by the three men. His only option was to charge forward. He clenched his teeth hard, thinking that if he just ran away, even Ho Qing wouldn't be able to catch up with him. Swords were flying at Fan Xing lightning fast, but he still made the decision to run. So far he had dodged absolutely every blade. His gold spiritual energy glowed around the boy. Ho Qing kept launching and launching attacks at him. Fan pushed off the ground hard, and with the activated spiritual energy, it was even easier to do so. Soon the boy was right in front of Ho Qing's face. He held a knife and a long and sharp sword. Ho Qing threw Fan Xing away from himself. From the shockwave, the main character's sword shattered into separate pieces. blood rushed out of his mouth. He had not expected such tremendous strength at all. Fan Xing flew far back to where he started from. The protagonist's small body painfully and swiftly rode the ground. Ho Qing said that it seemed like Fan Xing had lied about his cultivation level, saying that he must be at the top of the second level of spiritual movement right now, saying that Fan Xing was able to reach such a level of cultivation at such a young age, and his insight, saying that if Fan Xing had spent a couple more years in the sect, he couldn't even imagine what heights Fan Xing would have reached. He said all this with a completely calm face. However, Ho Qing couldn't help but add that unfortunately, he didn't have that chance anymore. From the pain and to some extent fear, poor Fan Xing was shaking. He heard Ho Qing order Qiantong to tie him up, but not too tightly. After all, he was about to become monster bait. He heard Qiantong agree with the young master. Fang didn't think that the difference between a second-level apex and a third-level apex would be so great. He couldn't even fight back. The protagonist was grabbed sharply and firmly by the arm. It was obviously Qiantong. He was now sitting on the boy's back, snapping his limb. The guy was laughing and telling the brat not to worry, for soon he would just be a pile of meat. Fan Xing silently lay his head on the floor. In his free hand, Zhao Zi's sword that was intended to kill him glistened. Fan Xing grabbed him tighter. Qiantong noticed this deed, and he was not happy about it at all. Now the sharp blade of the knife in Fan Xing's hands flew straight towards the man's temple. The man turned blue with terror and hatred. Before Qiantong could do anything, the blade penetrated deep into his throat. A lot of blood immediately appeared in the guy's mouth, but even more spurted out from the hole. Qiantong was terribly angry at Fan Xing. Lu San and Ho Qing were standing with their backs to them, so they didn't immediately notice what was happening. But when they did, they were startled. The main character had already slipped out of Qiantong's clutches, and Qian himself was standing on all fours and holding his throat. Fan Xing ran far and fast. There was no way to catch him anymore. Ho Qing was greatly surprised by his agility. Lu San literally immediately ran up to Qiantong and asked where the hell this kid came from. He told Qiantong that he could still be saved. The wound was only a couple of centimeters away from the vital point. He said that he would first seal the arteries with spiritual qi. Qiantong was already lying on the ground in his own pool of blood and told the young master that this brat was seriously injured and now lost his arm. He said not to worry about him, but rather run after him. Ho Qing replied that they wouldn't catch up with him, telling him that the boy was cunning and ruthless, and they didn't know when he would use his tricks again. Ho said that Qiantong's wound should be taken care of first, and they would discuss everything else later. He asked his buddy to relax. After all, he would definitely catch Fan Xing. Qiantong was still lying there, cowardly and angrily looking after the protagonist. Qiantong was already feeling a little better, but he was still cowardly, lying near the fire. His wound was no longer bleeding, but the side effects were definitely there. Ho Qing sat beside Lu San. He asked how Qiantong's condition was. The man with a scar on his face said that his vital organs were not injured. He said that he had fixed him up and he would definitely live. But there was one thing. Ho Qing in all likelihood knew what Lu San was about to say. In Lu San's hands was the knife that Fang had attacked Qiantong with. Ho Qing asked if it was Zhao Zi's dagger, although the answer was already obvious. Lu San in response said that he pulled it out from Qiantong's neck, saying that when this blade pierces the human body, it seals the acupuncture points with spiritual qi. The man scrutinized the blade in his hands. Ho Qing was horrified when he heard the man's reply. He asked if it meant. Lu San immediately replied that that was correct. For a while, Qiantong wouldn't be able to use his qi. Qiantong was awake, cursing the damn brat, shouting that he dared to wound him with Zhao Zi's dagger, saying that he would skin him alive when he got back on his feet. Lu San told the young master that they had no bait left and Qiantong was seriously injured, offered to return to the sect to regroup, and then, he wanted to say something else. But Ho Qing interrupted him without letting him finish, saying that if they left now, the sect would immediately decide that they had failed and they wouldn't get a second chance. Lu San exhaled and reminded again that they had no bait, and without it, they would have no way to kill the python toad. Ho asked Lu if he could find out where the boy was now. He was sitting leaning on a thick tree trunk. You couldn't see his face because of the shadows. Lu San closed his eyes, shook his head negatively and explained that there were many monsters in the demonic miasma forest and their aura of disorder. If he decided to run away or hide, they wouldn't be able to find him. Qiantong intervened in their conversation. He told the young master that nothing, saying that the boy would definitely return to the sect and they would have many chances to deal with him. Qian was still shaking and holding onto his throat. Ho Qing thrust his sword into the soil. He was angry, moved closer to the scarred man and asked if it was true that he wouldn't be able to track the boy. His face blew with anger. Lu San had no choice but to answer honestly. He said that yes, it was true. Ho Qing was silent, but he looked at the man with such languid eyes that nightmare. He stood up and said that if his memory serves him correctly, Lu contracted with the family to cure his brother's tuberculosis. He asked if that was the case. Such a question startled Lu San, but he replied that yes. He said that thanks to the medicine provided by the family, his brother is still hanging on, but tuberculosis is an incurable disease, so only they keep him alive. Ho Qing stood with his back to him and said properly, to the scarred man's horror, Hao said that if they failed the assignment, the family would break their contract with him. Lu San shouted that it couldn't be, saying that during the contract, they had come to an agreement that as long as he followed the young master and followed his orders, his brother would always have medicine. Ho Qing coldly said that he was telling the truth. He said that the family only hired Lu San for the talisman order, saying that if he failed, Lu would no longer be of any value in the family, saying that the elders would never support a useless contract. This terrified Lu San. Unexpectedly, Ho Qing stabbed his sword into Qian Tong's leg, saying that it wasn't just about Lu San. If they failed, he would have to agree to the family's condition, which he didn't want to accept. Qian Tong was shocked and startled by the Lord's sudden attack. He blew up and asked what was going on. Lu San also jumped to his feet in horror. Qian Tong was now worried about another pain. Lu San was shocked. He asked the young master what he was doing and grabbed his hand. Ho Qing calmly explained that they needed a decoy and Qian Tong was the only one who could play that role. He said that he had injured his left leg so he wouldn't run away. He told Lu San to hurry up and tie him up. They would start hunting the python toad as soon as dawn broke. Qian Tong was writhing in cutting pain, asking Ho how he could be so cruel and use him in his plans, shouting that he had served him like a slave and this was how he treated him now. Lu San was horrified. He watched this whole heartless scene and wanted to say something to the young master. However, Ho Qing interrupted him with a shout of encouragement, asking if he still didn't understand anything. The scarred man turned blue, cold sweat dripped down his face, and his pupils rolled behind his eyelids. Ho told him that there was no turning back. Neither he nor Lu San. They stood over the unfortunate Qian Tong. Lu Sanya was beyond angry and terrified. He fought back with himself, clenching his jaw tightly. That's when he obeyed the young master. The big birds had come at the smell of fresh blood. Now they were flying over the group's shelter waiting for some bait. It wasn't long before morning came, the sun slowly rising from behind the horizon, illuminating the cold forest after the night. Ho Jing was lightly dozing on a large branch high up in the tree, though his eyes were now closed. Qian Tong was still lying on the grass and chickening out. Only now the guy's mouth was gagged and his hands and feet were tightly bound. Qian Tong felt terrible. He was in pain and scared. Suddenly, he turned his attention to something and opened one eye. He saw Lu San going somewhere. Soon Ho Qing also got off his branch. Then Lu San said for Fan Xing to come out, for he knows that he is here. Unexpectedly, Fan Xing did come out. He smiled and said that, which was to be expected from Big Brother Lu. The protagonist wondered how he guessed that he was nearby. Fan Xing stood on the same branch where Ho Qing had just sat and held his knife at the ready. Also, the boy still had the bag with Lu Sanya's alcohol still hanging on his shoulder. Lu San activated his spiritual energy. He stood down and looked at the boy, pointing his long weapon at him. The sun was rolling out a big golden wheel from behind the horizon. Fan Xing stood on a large branch and looked straight down at Lu San, who had told the protagonist that this wine jug had traces of the tracking powder he had used as a hunter. The man said that as long as Fan Xing was in the demonic Miasma Mountains, he could find him by this scent. Fan Xing said that this is how it is. He looked at Lu San carefully. Then the protagonist told him that he didn't understand why he didn't tell Ho Qing about it and came to him himself. Then Lu San started looking for something in his clothes. Soon he pulled out a red pouch from there. Lu San threateningly said that he alone could also catch Fan Xing. He clutched the pouch tightly in his hands. When he squeezed it even harder, a bunch of red liquid squirted from it. Fan Xing was startled. Cold sweat immediately appeared on his face. The sack fell to the ground. But something started to happen to Lu San's arm. This red liquid was seeping into his arm and soaking inside. The veins were swelling as well as the muscles. The man's eyes were burning with a murderous red light. Then he smiled widely and told the younger one that this was a spiritual remedy made by the family. It could temporarily enhance body functions by taking the blood and flesh of a person. Fan Xing was actually astonished. He wondered if Big Brother Lu had decided to go this far just to catch him. The scarred man explained that Qianton was not a youngster. He was not suitable as bait that could attract the python toad's attention, and they would most likely fail the task. There was a lot of energy and magic flying around the man, and he kept his sword at the ready. Suddenly, Lu San lightning fast moved to another location. His eyes burned in inspired terror as he pointed his cold weapon at the guy. His sword flew toward the protagonist with a gust. He was now chasing after him and was completely confident in his strength, and therefore he was very surprised when Fan Xing moved to another place. He was now behind the scarred man, and his golden spiritual energy had already appeared around his body. Lu San's was red. Then Fan Xing loudly asked Lu San did the man really want him to die for the success of the talisman order. Lu didn't answer him at first. He only swung his weapon at him, the veins on the man's arms swelling terribly. With this blow he pushed the protagonist hard and he flew far backwards. This knocked the boy off his feet. Fan Xing slammed into the ground, raising a whole cloud of dust, and Lu San flew upwards a couple of meters backwards. Despite the strong attack, Fan Xing managed to deftly land on his feet. He was still confidently standing. From the cloud of dust in front of him, Lu San came out to the protagonist. His flame-red spiritual energy looked extremely intimidating. Then he finally answered the boy that he had his reasons. Fan Xing was shaking in pain. He realized that his right arm was completely paralyzed. Lu San immediately threw himself at the protagonist again. He flew at him from above. The man struck the ground where Fan Xing was standing with his spear. But fortunately, Fan Xing himself managed to bounce off in time to avoid being hit. The attack was followed by a new cloud of dust. Fan Xing clenched his teeth from exertion. The man kept going on and on attacking the poor kid. The protagonist decided to attack his opponent with his foot. However, Lu San was much stronger than Fan Xing, so it was not difficult for him to grab the boy's leg. Lu was still looking at the protagonist with red glowing eyes. Fan Xing was actually startled and greatly stressed by this. His eyes opened wide and his pupils shrank greatly. Lu San threw the main character with all his might. Fan Xing flew into a thick tree with tremendous power. The throw was so strong that 2 trees in the way broke in half. It was terribly painful and dangerous. Poor Fan Xing's mouth was gushing blood. The boy slid down a thick tree trunk. Most of his clothes were in his own blood. The boy's head was down. However, Fan Xing still found the strength. He extended 2 fingers in front of his face out of the last ones and said that this was his chance. Golden spiritual energies swirled around once again. Abruptly, Lu San turned around and noticed something that surprised him greatly. He clearly didn't expect Fan's magical flying sword to rush straight towards his head from behind. There was a violent and loud explosion. Fan Xing was at the altar. He wiped another batch of blood off his face and asked if he had gotten it, the sweat of agony running down his face. To his disappointment, Lu San was still alive. He was still standing on his own too, but now he also had many wounds on him. His eyes finally returned to their usual state. The scarred man was visibly angry. He asked who the junior was if he also had a flying sword with him. Fan Xing noticed that the man's right arm was also back to normal. There were no longer huge muscles and swollen veins on it, only tattered clothes and blood. Fong smiled without answering Big Brother Lu, but said that he probably couldn't move his right arm anymore. He suggested to stop there. He said that he didn't want to kill the man, so he should not stand in his way to Ho Qing. Lu San then closed his eyes and asked Fan Xing to apologize. He opened them again and started blowing some smoke out of his mouth. Fan Xing realized, and he was startled by the fact that it was most likely a concealed weapon. The attack from Lu San's mouth rushed towards the target. Fan Xing. Fang also threw something back at him. What he saw upstairs greatly surprised Lu San. Fan Xing was also shocked. He was pointing at something with his hand while standing with his mouth wide open. In fact, they usually looked at the Taurus as Fan Xing and Lu San's sword flew towards each other. They were both so identical, and so different at the same time. Everything around was dim. The forest was not green and the sky was blue. It was a cold season. Winter. White snow was coming from the cloudy sky. There was a clearing below where the town was placed. An adult and a small person were walking into the forest, leaving footprints behind them. The man and the boy were warmly dressed. The little boy asked his big brother if his mother had told him that he would work for the Ho family. He did not wait for an answer, but said that they were so bad after all, occupying their village, killing the villagers. He sincerely believed that his brother would not do such a thing while working for them, but he decided to ask about it. A noticeable blush appearing on his face from the cold and doubt. The older brother replied that the younger brother does not know anything, said that the Ho family are really real scoundrels, but they have a cure for the younger brother's illness. He asked if he did not want to get well soon. This elder was Lu San, and the youngest, his younger brother. Lu said that when his brother was healthy again, the elder brother would teach him how to drink and hunt. The boy listened to his brother attentively. Then, wrapping himself more tightly in his robes, he replied that of course he wanted to get better, but he didn't want his brother to do bad things just for him at all. The little boy's words surprised Lu Sanya greatly. Then he asked his brother what he was thinking about. Assured that he would just help the Ho family to hunt game, he smiled widely and stroked his little brother's head, telling him to relax, because big brother wouldn't do anything wrong. The little boy asked if it was true. It was actually important for him to know. Lu San didn't answer him anything, for now they were standing and looking at the forest they were near. Something inside made a murmur. Lu gazed intently into the snow-covered trees and remained silent. Then he abruptly ran and told his brother to follow him to play snowballs together. He said they hadn't done it in a while and he wanted to see if his younger brother's skills had improved. His brother agreed but warned him that Lu had better not give in like last time. Lu San had already made a snowball, telling him not to worry, for he would not be spared. But the first snowball had already flown into his back before he could do anything about it. Then he smiled widely and shouted that it wasn't bad. He aimed at his brother and said that he had learned surprise attacks. Snowflakes flew back and forth, from the oldest to the youngest and vice versa. The opponents' swords didn't meet. They crossed paths and flew towards their targets. Something greatly surprised young Lu San. He was about to throw another snowball, but stopped abruptly. It was because for some unknown reason his little brother was crying bitterly. Tears were streaming down his cheeks, and the boy still had a snowball in his hand, which he was about to throw. Lu San looked at him. He asked in astonishment why he was crying. His younger brother answered him nothing, but threw a snowball, which this time meant much more than the usual game. It flew into Lu San's chest and he realized that he had never been able to lie. The same place where the snowball had once hit him. Now Fan Xing's sword had arrived. It had entered deep into the scarred man's body. Now he stood there unable to move. His thoughts were in chaos. Fan Xing was breathing heavily, but he wasn't happy about this kind of hit. Lu San's sword flew into his alcohol bag that was now hanging on the protagonist's shoulder. It pierced through it and the alcohol poured onto the ground. Lu San also fell to the ground, his clothes pouring blood from the wound in his chest. Fang held the sword pouch in his hands in astonishment. He had no words, but then he still asked, "Did Lu San miss?" The sun was high in the sky and shining clearly. The scarred man lay leaning against a tree. Fan Xing had pulled the sword from his chest and was now just standing silently in front of him holding his gift. Lu San's sword was stuck into the ground beside him. Fan Xing placed the bag of alcohol beside him. The protagonist looked at these things and pondered aloud that he felt as if Lu San was purposely aiming past, although he probably just imagined it. Ho Cheng stood in silence and looked at the clear afternoon sky. He realized that it looked like this scum Lu San had lost to the boy. Unlike the scarred man, Qian Tong was still alive. He was shaking and crying. Looking at Ho Ching, who held his long sword right next to his throat, Ho apologized to Qian Tong, but said he couldn't wait any longer. The sword began to move. Ho Chang already wanted to kill the useless Qian Tong, but something whipped up his cold weapon. This surprised and angered Hao. Poor Qian pissed his pants in fear. Fan Xing's sword dug into the ground right in front of his face. Qian Tong was terrified. Ho Ching turned back in surprise. It was there that he saw Fan Xing holding Lu San's long spear, smiling and telling young Master Ho that he couldn't believe that he was killing his own people. The sun was still shining clearly. Fan Xing was standing at the back, a couple of meters away from Ho Ching. Ho said that just as he thought that Junior had not escaped, he asked where Lu San was. He did not expect an answer, because he knew very well that Fan Xing must have already killed him. The protagonist replied to him that he didn't want to do it, but the man was too stubborn. Ho Ching turned to the boy and told him that he guessed that Lu San knew where Fang was, but in no way expected him to be foolish enough to go after him alone. Ho Ching's sword glowed with the blue spiritual energy of the master. Finally Ho came closer and said that it was good that he was dead. His overly soft temper was no use. Fan Xing asked if he was serious, telling him that he thought he was much better than the young master who was killing his men by his own hand. Ho Ching clenched his sword harder out of anger and replied that so be it. Arguing with Junior Fan is useless. He can only fail to understand one thing. He asked how he had the courage to stand in front of him alone. Did the little guy really think he could overpower him by himself? Ho Ching pointed his sword at Fan Xing. Fan Xing shrugged and asked if Ho Ching was sure he was alone. This astonished the young gentleman. He turned back sharply and what he saw horrified him. The cause of Ho Qing's terror was Qiantong, who managed to rise to his feet, remove his tightly tied ropes, and attack his young master. Ho Qing was able to block Qiantong's first attack. The metal objects met accompanied by a loud sound. Qiantong was thrown back, but he was still on his feet. A new sweat appeared on his face and he hissed through clenched teeth that Ho Qing was still able to block the punch. Ho Qing called out Qiantong at the top of his voice, wanting to ask why him, but something stopped him and he didn't have time to finish his sentence. It was all about the same Qiantong. At first glance the guy looked completely normal, truthfully considering all his injuries. He was overly healthy and full of vigor. Ho Qing especially paid a lot of attention to the guy's knee that he had just stabbed. It was now intact. This shocked and angered Ho Qing. He didn't understand how this was possible. Then he asked Qiantong how the wound on his leg had healed so quickly. Had his spiritual qi recovered? After this question, the protagonist intervened. He told Ho Qing that he believed Zhaoji didn't have time to tell him everything about this dagger. Fan Xing revealed that it actually seals qi when it pierces a person's body, causing the injured person to lose cultivation for a while. That was why he and Lu San had decided yesterday that Qiantong, whose qi had been sealed, would be left without power. He said that even so, it was unlikely that Ho knew that qi only remained sealed under the condition that one must be bleeding. Once one stopped bleeding, qi would quickly recover. Ho Qing shouted out just to not tell him that. Qiantong said that was correct, telling him that when his neck wound stopped bleeding, his qi gradually recovered. But at that moment, he was tied up and couldn't speak. The puzzles came together in Ho Qing's mind. He realized that this all meant that the boy had handed Qiantong the dagger. This stunned him. Now young Master Ho didn't look so cocky and cold-blooded now. He shouted to Qiantong that since the suitable bait had come to them on its own and his qi had recovered, why wasn't he on his side? Ho Qing was terribly nervous. He thought about how he was truly scared by this kid's thinking. He couldn't let him return to the sect. He decided that he needed to get rid of Fan Xing here and now. Qiantong then shouted for Ho to shut up. He was beyond angry and asked how he would be able to live peacefully knowing that there were witnesses who saw how he was ready to kill his own men, saying that he was sure that once Ho dealt with the boy, the next one would be him and he wanted to live, asking if he thought he had any other choice but to team up with this boy and kill him. Ho Qing stood with his back to him and remained silent. Then he replied that Qian was right. Ho Qing lifted his head up and looked at the clear sky. Next, he gripped his long sword much harder, and finally rendered to Fan Xing that he admits he now regretted his actions, saying that if he had known that Fan would be so difficult to deal with, he would never have listened to Lu Feng's words and immediately chose him as bait. But it was too late to say anything. His spiritual energy swirled around Ho Qing, knocking those around him off their feet. Qiantong covered himself with his hands and swore. Ho Qing whirled around, and Fan Xing and Qiantong ran at him from different directions. Qian called out to the boy, telling him to shun the Qingfeng sword in his hand. It was the spiritual weapon of the upper-class family. Shouting for action, Fan Xing threw Lu San's spear and shouted for him to catch it. Then he used the ring on his finger and took out a magical flying sword. Finally, the protagonist could hold it together. Qiantong caught Lu San's spear, but he had to jump high to do so. Fan Xing meanwhile swiftly flew towards Ho Qing. It was a good thing that Ho Qing's face couldn't be seen, because the expression no one would want to see on his face. His face was covered in something black. This greatly surprised Fan Xing. He did not yet understand what it was and what was happening. Ho Qing was sinking deeper and deeper into darkness. A lightning sword with blue energy cut through the air. Unexpectedly, Ho Qing found himself behind the backs of both opponents. It wasn't that simple. Qiantong's heavy body involuntarily fell to his knees. A pool of blood began to form underneath him. Qiantong was shaking all over, and all of his clothes were dyed bright red. A little while later, he fell heavily to the ground. The poor man no longer had the strength to hold on. Fan Xing stared at the body at his feet in astonishment. He didn't understand how and when it happened when he was injured. A small drop of blood rolled off Ho Qing's sword. Now Qiantong's body was lying in a huge puddle of his own blood that had yet to soak into the dry soil. His spiritual energy no longer swirled around Ho Qing. Fan Xing was angry and scared. He didn't see any of Ho Qing's movements either. Then the sacred demonic book Yin Yang told him that the Qingfeng sword was a top-grade spiritual weapon, endowing the wielder with the ability to move as fast as the wind, but it was harmful to spiritual meridians and cultivation. This surprised Fan Xing, but he decided that it was not surprising that he was suddenly so fast. Ho Qing was willing to sacrifice his cultivation without a polemic. Ho Qing glared angrily and intimidatingly at the protagonist. He jumped and spun around again. This greatly stressed and frightened Fan Xing. He cried out loudly. There was only a slight glimpse of Ho Qing's face and the way he cut through the air. Fan Xing's mouth was wide open from the horror of danger. Now there was a tremendous fiery explosion. It rose high above the trees and was nightmarishly loud. Fan Xing ran with all his legs away from the fire that was breathing down his back. He ran and sparks flew all around him. Fan's footsteps had probably never been so wide before. The flames were crushing everything in their path, breaking the unfortunate trees, burning the green grass. Fan Xing realized that he had been too careless. He didn't think Ho Qing would prove to be so determined. Now the protagonist only had to flee. Something stopped him abruptly. Ho Qing's spiritual energy cut the air above the protagonist. Fan Xing braked so diligently that he raised a cloud of dust and almost fell down. Ho Qing stood in front of him, looking directly at his opponent. Fan Xing hurriedly folded his hands and summoned the Nine Snakes Golden Flame Sword. The sword appeared beside the master. Fan Xing immediately pointed it at Ho Qing. Ho Qing said that he thought he had seen this sword before. He asked where the boy got it from. Fan Xing replied to young Master Ho that he was asking too many questions. He threw his sword at Ho Qing. The flight was accompanied by generous fire. The sword blade was already almost at Ho Qing's head. The sword flew like a comet. Ho Qing stretched out his hand and his spiritual energy swirled there. Ho placed a large and sturdy shield in front of him. Suddenly, he turned his attention to some sounds and turned his head. There he saw Fan Xing running away. He ran with the best of his legs, clenching his teeth tightly in the hope that he would not be caught up again. Then Ho Qing managed to redirect Fan Xing's demonic sword towards him as well, his eyes glittering ominously with blue light. Now the sword was flying toward its master in flames. He had already almost reached Fan Xing's back. The protagonist extended his arm and dropped to his knee. By doing so, he caused the sword to land and enter the soil of the ground. Despite his luck, Fan Xing was still scratched a bit. The skin on his cheek split open and blood flowed out. Ho Qing asked him did he really think he could escape. They were standing a dozen meters away. It was then that Fang realized he had no choice. The boy looked confident and determined. He pulled a knife from the sheath that was strapped to his belt at the back. Fan Xing tightly gripped the blade with his other hand. Then he strode it sharply over the knife and cut his skin. An awful lot of blood splattered. Now there was a puddle under Fan Xing. Ho Qing couldn't even think of anything like this, so he was shocked. He asked what the boy was doing. The protagonist didn't answer Ho Qing, but said that since he couldn't leave, they would die together. Fang smiled sneakily, and spiritual energy enveloped his hand with the wound. Ho Qing watched carefully. A drop of cold sweat rolled down his cheek. He saw Fan Xing's blood and spiritual energy and realized that this boy was shifting highly concentrated spiritual chi with his blood. Then Ho pointed his sword at the protagonist again and asked if he was trying to lure the python toad here, saying that, well, Fang would do him a real favor. First he would kill him and then deal with the demonic beast. Fan Xing smiled widely as he asked the young master if he was right that Ho Qing had never met this toad before. Purple chi began to appear in the sky. Ho Qing listened to Fan Xing, and the latter was telling him that they become very fast when they hunted prey. Abruptly, something really surprised Ho Qing. Something swept across the sky. Fan Xing also paid attention to it. Suddenly, there was an explosion. It was very close, and because Fan Xing that Ho Qing was thrown back together with a bunch of trees. They were torn up by the shockwave right from the roots. The smoke cleared a bit and behind it showed red glowing eyes. They were looking directly at the main character and the young gentleman. It was that python frog. Compared to the guys, it seemed even more enormous. The frog emitted an incredibly strong spiritual energy. Fan Xing's size was much smaller than one of its eyes, which was terribly frightening. Ho Qing's situation wasn't much better. The book told the protagonist that the python toad, a demonic beast of the 4th rank, a hybrid of python and toad, has the ability to spray poisonous mist and is distinguished by its python armor. Non-sacred weapons cannot harm it. The frog hatched directly at humans. Then Fan Xing asked young master who still wanted to kill him and then deal with the python toad. Unlike Ho Qing, Fan Xing was surprisingly calm. The former was pouring sweat, and his eyes reflected true shock and nightmare. Ho Qing replied to the boy that he was really good since he was able to predict the appearance of the python toad. He also asked if Fan Xing had never thought about being the target of this beast. Ho Qing stood on his sword and spoke about how he wished he could kill the boy alone. Now he was standing on a thin and long cold weapon, like a skateboard, looking at the fan from above and saying that getting rid of the python toad after it consumed Fan Xing was not bad either. He promised to be patient and wait. Ho Qing crossed his fingers right at his forehead and said goodbye to Fan Xing while closing his eyes. Ho Ching instantly flew away, and Fan was left to stare after him. The toad was still there as well. Ho once again called him little brother Fan. When the young master left, Fan Xing smiled to himself. Ho Ching turned around at something and was surprised. All because the frog extended its long mighty tongue straight towards him. It was already about to catch and devour the young cruel lord. Ho Ching was in the shell of his spiritual energy, and there was also frog energy hugging around him. The guy was not amused at all. Then something happened. Ho Ching's eyes opened wide. He stood on his sword in a different way, preparing to do something. The guy ended up jumping off it. He slid his hand across the frog's wet tongue, drenched in some kind of poison. Ho Ching managed to roll down it, his long sword already sticking out in the burnt ground. However, his happiness did not last long. The frog caught him with its tongue and turned him upside down. Ho tried to pull out his sword, though he had no time for it at all. In spite of the dire situation, Ho Ching managed to do so. He grabbed his weapon. Ho Ching hurriedly swung his hand, clenching his teeth hard in tension. It hit his tongue and he was finally released. But there was another explosion. Ho Ching was thrown back again. Fan Xing watched as the poor guy entered the ground and drove through it, leaving behind a bunch of sparks. Ho Ching was still alive even after being hit so hard, but he was not unharmed at all. His clothes had his own blood on them and he was breathing heavily. Ho Ching didn't understand why he was targeted since there was boy's blood everywhere, but he was still standing on his feet. He saw Fan Xing's surprised face and wondered what this little guy had done. Fan Xing thought about the fact that he had won the bet. Although it was a rank 4 demonic beast, it still had the appropriate behaviors. He said that its eyes reminded him of python eyes. Besides, the python toad has python blood in its veins. The protagonist looked directly at the frog's red eyes and said that therefore, it must have the habits of a python. That is, it does not see stationary objects and only targets moving objects. Ho Ching shouted to the beast that this scum was right behind him, pointing at Fan Xing with his sword. He shouted that there was no point in chasing him if he could devour the boy. His shouting didn't please the frog. Besides, it didn't see the protagonist. The beast once again took out its long tongue and pointed it at Ho Ching. When the tongue reached its target again, there was an explosion and a cloud of dust rose. Ho Ching didn't hurt much. He said through gritted teeth that since she was such a brainless beast, he ran, swinging his sword. Ho flew higher towards the frog. He was now a couple of centimeters from its tongue. Young Master Ho shouted that he would finish her off first. The tip of his sharp sword was right at her head. Ho Ching attacked the frog, but it was as if it didn't care at all. Ho punched one of the blisters on the frog's forehead. From there, a bunch of green liquid spurted out right into the young master's face. The python frog raised its head and let out a horrible ultrasound that rippled around the neighborhood in waves. It reached Fan Xing as well. The protagonist had to cover his ears with his hands and try his best to stay on his feet. Ho Ching lands a nice shot to the body. He was getting farther and farther away from the frog. The guy's sword dug into the ground. He was covered in green frog liquid. Ho Ching was already at the end of his strength. He realized that it was hard to deal with her alone. Fortunately, Qingfeng's sword could injure her. However, he was still afraid that the sword body wouldn't be able to resist corrosion. Then he turned his attention to Fan Xing, who was incomprehensibly doing something, and was greatly surprised. It turned out that the boy covers his nose and mouth with his hands, because the python frog emits not only ultrasound, but also gas. Ho Ching was horrified that the beast was releasing poison. He looked at the frog's huge mouth from where green smoke was pouring out. The young gentleman also covered himself with his hand. Froggen finally started to close her mouth. It had blackened dramatically. Its red shell was now clearly visible, with some white smoke emitting from the frog. Ho Ching thought that this was the end after all and she had run out of tricks. But Fan Xing was not so calm. On the contrary, he was frightened, remembering something he didn't want to think about. The python frog inflated its chest heavily and inhaled a bunch of air. Now Fan Xing and Ho Ching rushed to run away in terror. The poor protagonist was almost hysterical, shouting to the python toad that he and Ho Ching were not on the same page. Ho Ching released the chains from his sleeve, intending to attack again or at least block the frog's strike. He and Fan Xing were being carried somewhere far away. The protagonist didn't think that this scoundrel Ho Ching had another spiritual weapon, so he wanted to keep it a secret. Fan Xing was actually surprised at young Master Ho's skill at first. Chains enveloped the broken and heavy tree. They wrapped it around him a few times to make it tighter. The strong spiritual chains were under great tension. Fan Xing was already close to the mouth of the python frog. Ho Ching looked at him and smilingly said that this time they would really say goodbye to brother Feng. Ho was obviously very happy and satisfied with this opportunity. Fan Xing, on the other hand, was not amused at all, and he cursed loudly. The protagonist rapidly flew closer and closer to the mouth of the beast, and it was only happy to have a new treat. When Fan Xing did get inside, the python frog closed its mouth and eyes. All the chaos stopped. Ho Chang also stopped in front of the frog. He stood and looked at it, saying that this annoying brat was finally dead. He said that now it was the beast's turn. Ho Chang was determined and confident. Finally he was ready to use all his strength. Fan Xing was inside the frog. Its stomach was huge. Fang was standing knee-deep in the bubbling green liquid and he definitely didn't like it. He realized that the toad had swallowed him and this was a great chance to kill it from within. Fan Xing looked at his hands, thinking that he had used too much spiritual chi in the past 2 days and now couldn't even summon the 9 snakes golden flame sword. A green blob flew from the wall of the drinking toad's stomach. It fell directly onto Fan Xing's arm. Steam appeared there, which didn't broadcast anything good. Fan Xing was also well aware that the spiritual chi protecting his body wouldn't be enough for long. He knew that once it was depleted, he would immediately dissolve in his stomach juices. The stomach juices inside this frog would be enough for 24 of these Fan Xing. The protagonist was thinking about how great it would be if he had an elixir that could quickly restore a significant amount of spiritual chi. Some idea popped into his head related to the elixir. There was a fiery explosion. Many sparks flew. Ho Chang was in a pitiful state. He had many abrasions and wounds on him. All his clothes were covered in his own blood. His hair was frayed. Now he could only sit up, leaning on the trunk of a broken tree. The young master's mighty sword was also broken. Only a small piece was left of it. Ho Chang looked at his weapon and realized that the python toad poison was too strong. Qingfeng's sword was destroyed. Another attack flew towards Ho Chang. Ho Chang in turn released his chains with his last strength. They swirled around one of the whole trees. Another explosion after the python frog attack, but Ho Chang managed to bounce back with the help of his spirit chains. He deftly landed well away from the blast, but the toad quickly caught up with him. Now it was again a couple of meters away from the young master. He looked at it and thought that his chi had reached its limit. He realized that this beast was definitely in line with its rank. Ho wondered if he couldn't defeat it alone. At that time, Ho Chang thought of Ching Shui and clenched the chain in his hand hard. He had made up his mind for himself. The young gentleman clenched his teeth and shouted loudly that it was now all or nothing for him. The red spiritual energy of the chains began to seem to burn, which was clearly happening. The python frog began to open its mouth again and inhale oxygen. Ho Chang twisted his chains and sent them towards the beast with a gust, shouting that this was his chance. The python frog also attacked Ho Chang. The attack hit Ho Chang hard and he flew backwards. He hit the ground painfully with his tailbone, but it didn't bother him much because it hurt more inside. The guy had to cough up a lot of blood. He was now lying on the ground, his body shaking and a small trickle of blood flowing from his mouth. Ho Chang looked up with one eye. A beast. The frog was also all shivering. Luckily it was no longer in one piece. It too had many abrasions and wounds on it. Its thick skin was cracking. Suddenly, the python frog started spewing fire. This pleased Ho Chang and he shouted that it had finally worked. It even gave him some more energy. The toad closed its eyes in pain. Something was happening inside of it. Then it opened its mouth and eyes again and began to make a horrible ultrasonic sound. It traveled in waves through the forest. With terror and commotion, the birds rose from their seats and soared into the sky. In the end, the frog fell heavily to the ground. It no longer had the strength to fight and attack. Her python skin was on fire, with many sparks flying in the air. Ho Chang noticed something strange. He had to take a closer look. He said to himself that he hadn't thought about it, but after all, the python toad itself was a valuable material for the elixir. Someone was covered in fat and eating a piece of hearty and appetizing meat. It was Fan Xing. He was full of energy, sitting on the drinking toad and telling young Master Ho that here they were. They had met again. He was smiling widely at the guy. Fan Xing was sitting on the thick belly of a dead python frog. Seeing him, Ho Chang immediately jumped to his feet. He angrily asked if it was Fang who killed the python toad. He said through gritted teeth that the boy ate the meat of the demonic beast but did not explode and survived. Ho Chang asked the protagonist who he was. Fan Xing rose to his feet and took out his golden sword. Asked young Master Ho if he himself was not tired of so many questions. He said that if he was not mistaken, Ho Chang's spiritual energy was at 0. Asked if that was the case. The protagonist didn't wait for an answer. He himself had told the elder not to worry and relax. After all, he would take care of him properly. But if he knelt down and begged him for mercy, he would consider letting Ho Chang go. Fan Xing said all this while smiling sneakily. Unexpectedly, Ho Chang still immediately fell to his knees. This horrified and even shocked Fan Xing. Ho Qing, sitting on his knees in front of Fan Xing, handed him a red pouch and apologized to his brother Fang for offending him, saying that the boy was right when he said that the elder had made a mistake. He said in a trembling voice that these were the materials for the elixir that he had brought with him, saying that he would give more when they returned to the sect. Now Ho Qing sincerely hoped that Fang would be able to forgive him. Then Fan Xing deftly and nimbly jumped off the python frog and said that he didn't think that a young master like Ho Qing would be so obedient. However, no obedient he was. Ho Qing is a mean and self-serving person. While Fan Xing couldn't see his face because it was downcast, Ho was smiling widely, thinking that in the end, Fang was just a petty bully going for profit. He said to himself under his breath that when that brat got closer, he would take a flaming chi pill that would restore his chi and finish him off when he wasn't expecting it. The pill was in the guy's clenched fist. He knew that this pill lowered his cultivation by 1 level, but it didn't matter anymore. Suddenly, Fan Xing's sword stabbed into Ho Qing's back from behind. It cut through his body. A lot of blood rushed out. Ho Qing didn't even realize what had happened at first. Dark red blood flew in all directions. Ho Qing was no longer so smug. He told Fan Xing in a trembling voice that he told him he would let him go. His body was shaking in pain. The guy was in pain to even breathe. Fan Xing smiled, closed his eyes and asked in response did he really think he was a fool and didn't understand what Ho Qing was up to. The protagonist reminded him that he had already told him not to be so stubborn in the future, because sooner or later he would bring trouble on himself. These words struck Ho Qing to the core. Such humiliation he had never felt before, and probably will not feel. And they struck him so because he still remembered the words of that thief, when she told him, brother, to let him give him one last piece of advice. She said that in the future he should not be so stubborn, because sooner or later he would bring trouble on himself. Word for word just as Fan Xing had just said. Ho Qing also remembered how he replied that he would definitely listen to her advice and change. Ho Qing's eyes, due to the large blood leakage, slowly began to darken. The puzzles in his darkened mind came together, and he shouted with all the anger that meant it was him, saying that because of him, he had lost the demonic spiritual pills and had to accept the order for the talisman. A lot of blood came out of his mouth. He called Junior a bastard and asked why he had done it. Did he realize how much he had to suffer to get to this point? Fan Xing already looked at him more seriously and replied that he didn't care about his suffering. He revealed that the moment Ho Qing pushed Xiaoman right in front of the sect gate, his death sentence was signed. Ho Qing's eyes were about ready to close, but he asked through his sleep about pushing the sect gate. Then he finally realized that. So it was Fan Xing who was that beggar. The guy no longer had the energy to even be angry. He wanted to say that if he knew, there should have been more next, but he passed out and fell. When his body was already lying on the ground, kicking up some dust, he said to himself that he should have just gotten in line then. The purple spiritual energy still hovered in the air above the forest, between the trees and at their roots. Fan Xing stood and silently looked at young Master Ho's dead bloody body. Then he abruptly turned his attention to something and turned around. Some kind of golden circle appeared above him. Everything glittered and sparkled, looking like a fairy tale. The main character's sword was still sticking out in Ho Qing's body. Fan Xing crouched down because the golden shell had shrunk. Apparently, the light was coming from the python toad's skin, or something inside. Fan Xing sat beside it and didn't understand what exactly was going on. A little while later he noticed the golden pill that is emitting this light. The protagonist jumped to his feet in surprise. When he walked over and picked it up, it was quite large. He said that apparently it was a demonic spirit pill of a python toad. Fan Xing felt as if the recently dead toad had come to life and was standing right behind him. He told himself that, what was to be expected of a fourth-ranked demon? He felt suppressed even just holding it in his hand. The boy knew that the spiritual scripture of the revered ones allowed him to consume spiritual materials, thus absorbing their spiritual energy, but it was very risky. For example, last time he almost lost his life. Fan Xing definitely didn't want to experience it a second time. He realized that despite all this, if he used the usual slow purification methods, there would be another problem. It would be that he wasn't sure if he could absorb the spiritual chi completely given his level. Fan Xing silently looked at her. The boy was in deep thought and was full of doubts. However, nothing would change with time and he realized that, and so he just took it and put it in his mouth, screaming to go to hell, and he would just take it, because who doesn't take risks doesn't drink. When it ended up in his stomach, he was greatly surprised, for everything seemed to be in order. but the happiness was short-lived. Something began to happen inside the boy. The purple spiritual energy began to rise up again. Spiritual chi hovered in the air in Fan Xing's surroundings. A black cat came out of the forest. In fact, he was just passing by, but decided to approach the skin of a python toad. The cat sniffed her out of interest. Then he noticed Fan Xing lying unconscious and was a bit surprised. The beast looked questioningly at the protagonist. He came closer and meowed, looking right into Fan Xing's face. Cody stunned and jumped up as Fan Xing abruptly opened his eyes. Fan Xing was also surprised. The cat was no longer around, and Fan Xing was still lying on the ground as well. Quite a while later, the boy jumped up abruptly, now sitting up and poking in. The black cat, it turns out, hadn't gone anywhere. It was just hiding in the bushes and watching Fan Xing. Fan Xing didn't pay any attention to him. He looked at his hands that were emitting thick spiritual energy, and shouted that he had finally broken through, saying that, so this was how the third level of spiritual movement felt. Then he stood up, stretched and said that he wondered how many days had passed. He decided that it was time to return to the sect. Right now the protagonist felt fine, even though there were many abrasions and wounds on him. All he cared about was that he hadn't yet figured out how he would explain the situation to the elders. He looked back, and there, the birds had long since devoured the remains of the toad and Ho Ching. Suddenly, something from above greatly surprised Fan Xing. He saw purple chi and birds in the sky. Looking up, he decided that his version would probably be like this. The sky was blue and clear. The sun was shining brightly as usual. Ahead was the sect's disciple city. 2 disciples were on the steps, one sitting, the other standing, looking up at the sky and covering themselves from the blazing sun. The chubby guy dreamed of catching a bird for dinner. The thought made his mouth drool. Abruptly, his blissful thoughts were interrupted by something that startled him greatly. He was startled and surprised by the crippled Fan Xing, who had finally returned to the sect, bringing with him a huge python frog paw. The fellow who was sitting on the steps abruptly sprang to his feet, took up his sword, and ordered the little stranger to tell him why he had come. Fan Xing's lips indicated that he was about to cry. It didn't take long to wait. Fang blatantly fell to his knees at the piece of meat and sobbed bitterly. The 2 guys felt embarrassed. They couldn't understand what was going on and didn't know what to do. Then Fan Xing, through the stream of tears that washed his dirty face, shouted that his name was Fan Xing. He was a disciple of the outer sect, said that half a month ago, he and his brother Ho Ching learned about the Order of the Talisman and went to the demonic Miasma Mountain to kill the python toad. But everything went wrong. He said that the other elder brothers were dead, and only he survived. The guys were blown away that Ho's older brother was dead. They literally couldn't believe their own ears. An elderly but strong man came out of the temple behind him and said that it was not proper for a cultivator to weep and wail. The 2 disciples immediately crossed their arms and, calling the old man an elder, said that this boy claimed to have worked with Brother Ho on the Talisman Order case, and he was also the only survivor. The elder stretched his hand forward and said that was enough for now. On his thumb was a thick gold ring. He sternly told the strange boy to follow him. Fan Xing, whose eyes were full of tears, looked at the elderly man. Then the elder turned to the 2 disciples, told them not to say a word to anyone about what had happened today, asked if they understood him, and they said yes. The sun was lighting up the city and the cold clouds were dropping lower and lower. It was getting towards evening. Now Fan Xing was in a room where 3 elders were sitting in front of him on beautiful chairs. One of them said, meaning that as soon as they came to the mountain, Ho Ching and the others were about to prepare the bait, but suddenly a python toad appeared. Fan Xing sat on a low poof and replied that yes, that was the case. He said that the bait was not placed in time, so senior brother Ho and the others rushed in. He said that the python toad was very strong. His eyes were so innocent when he said that it soon killed senior brothers Zhao and Xian. The boy said that there was nothing he could do while his brothers were fighting. He hid behind a tree and miraculously escaped detection. The 3 elders listened attentively to him. Then when Fang finished speaking, one of them asked if they had mentioned who the bait would be. Fan Xing intensely negative shook his head and replied that Brother Ho probably thought he was too young, so he didn't go into details, saying that he just asked for help to place the bait when the time came to distract the python toad, but no one could have guessed that it would appear so soon. The 2 elders looked at each other. They both clearly realized something. One of them thought that, as expected, Ho Ching was going to use this boy. Fan Xing wiped away another batch of tears and said that in the end, Big Brother Ho realized that he couldn't overpower the python toad and left Brother Lu to save himself. But the python toad didn't care about him because Lu was immobile, so it rushed after Big Brother Ho and killed him. The elder, who was different from the other two with a long white beard and hair, said that he seemed to be telling the truth. Because python toads are characterized by natural instinct, they only react to movement. He said that Ho Ching had signed his own death sentence when he decided to escape. Then he told the boy to go on. He asked how the python toad died. Fan Xing raised his head to look into the elder's eyes and told him that after killing Ho Ching, she had returned. A gust of demonic wind burst out of her mouth and sucked in Brother Zhao and Brother Lu. Senior Brother Lu was still alive when he was sucked inside the python toad, but he managed to notice that he was clutching a sword in his hand. After it devoured them, the python toad suddenly raised its head to the sky with its mouth open and stopped moving. Fan said it thought it was going to use some scary technique, so it ran away, saying he was lucky it didn't chase after him. He said that it wasn't until the next day that he dared to return. At that time, the python toad had long been dead and its corpse was encased by other demonic beasts. Fan Xing was so good at lying that he could even imagine how it was all according to his story. The protagonist imagined how surprised and shocked he was. He would tell the elders that he found their corpses in her stomach, saying it was horrible, just horrible. The elder with long white beard and hair finally said that Lu San was an amazing person. He must have taken the chance and crushed the lungs of the python toad from the inside, which caused its death. But he also said that his spiritual chi must have been depleted, so he died with it. The other elder bent over a little and suggested to end it there, said that there was nothing more to say, and asked where the inner python toad pill was. Had Fan Xing brought it? Fan Xing shook his head negatively again through his tears and said that he had searched for a long time but couldn't find her, so he only took the back leg of the python frog. Then the elder sadly raised his hand, closed his eyes and said that Fan Xing was really useless, saying that it took him a whole night to go back and examine everything, saying that the blood of the python toad had attracted many demons. The demonic spiritual pill contained the largest amount of demonic energy. It could not be left behind so easily. The long-haired elder told Fan Xing that since he didn't bring it, according to the sect's rules, the order for the talisman would be considered a failure. He was telling the boy not to be sad. After all, being alive was already the greatest reward, and now they were done and he could go. Fan Xing stood up, folded his hands politely and agreed, asking to let his disciple leave, and was about to leave. But someone abruptly called out to him. An elder with a long beard and hair called out to him. He stood up abruptly from his chair. The other elder looked at him incredulously and told Fan Xing to wait outside and they needed to talk. Fan Xing of course obeyed the order. The doors behind the boy slammed loudly. Then the long-haired elder asked Yuan, the other elder, why he had asked the boy to delay. Yuan showed politeness with gestures and replied, calling the other two brothers, that although he had not been helpful in the matter as ordered by the talisman, they should recognize his success and reward him. The other elder was greatly surprised by Yuan's words. He objected that after all he didn't bring the demon pill, because of which the talisman order hall wouldn't bring them any income, saying that if they decided that the order was successful and gave him the stone essence dust, wouldn't they suffer great losses? Yuan told his brother that he was mistaken, explaining his words by saying that in recent years, apart from the disciples coercing by force, fewer and fewer people had taken the initiative regarding the talisman order. He said that they would rather steal and cheat their brothers in battle than come to the talisman order room and exchange resources properly. He said the reason for this was simple. The disciples of the sect believe that the person who took the order for the talisman has no higher than a 10% chance of surviving. There have also been many cases where they survived but didn't get the necessary resources, and as a result, no one wants to pursue it and die in vain. The stone essence dust is an exception. It is under their control, and if the disciples can't get resources from other sources, they will have no choice but to take the talisman order and sign their own death warrant. The white-haired elder asked Yuan what he was trying to say with that. Yuan replied that this time they would count the talisman order as fulfilled and reward him with stone essence dust. They would also downplay the death of Ho Ching and the others and report the incident. Yuan was an extremely smart and cunning old man. He said that this way, the other disciples would stop being afraid of the order when they saw that even a boy could handle it, and when the time came, many more people would come to them to go for it. Of course, Fan Xing was standing outside the door and diligently trying to eavesdrop on them. The protagonist was very curious about what these old men were talking about, but they had set up some kind of array that made it impossible for Fan to hear anything. He prayed that there wouldn't be any plot holes in his story. Suddenly, the doors opened and a surprised Fan Xing, who had not expected anything like this, flew forward. The boy's cheek fell more against the stone floor. He grimaced in discomfort. Then, when he looked up and saw Elder Yuan looking at him, he felt very embarrassed. He started to speak in a shaky voice, wanting to lie something, that he was waiting outside here and there. But to his delight, he didn't have to talk for long. Yuan interrupted the protagonist to accept their congratulations and said that his order for the talisman had been successful, and now he should follow the elder to get the reward. Fan Xing was genuinely stunned by his words. He literally didn't understand what the man was talking about. Fong hurriedly bowed in front of Yuan. They were standing at some archway that visibly divided the room. Elder Yuan handed Fan Xing a small bundle, saying that here was his reward, telling him that it was 3 liang of stone essence dust. The protagonist politely and reservedly, very formally, accepted his award, thanking the elder. Fong held the roll up in his hands and Yuan told him that originally the order for the talisman was seen as a failure because he didn't bring the inner pill of the python toad. But he had expressed his desire to fight demons at such a young age and his courage was commendable, so they decided to make an exception for him. Fan Xing was pleased. But Yuan couldn't help but say that Fong should remember that others must not find out about his privilege. He seriously said that when they start asking questions, it was just worth saying that he brought them the python toad pill and the reward was given according to the statute. He asked if the boy understood. Fong Xing finally replied that he understood, although from the outside he looked like a very polite and well-mannered kid. In fact, he was already cheering and thinking about how lucky he was, thinking that perhaps fortune had finally turned to him. This thought couldn't help but make him happy. Suddenly, someone entered the room. This someone surprised Fan Xing very much and asked his uncle if he wanted to see him. Yuan called the guy Xianzhao and said that he was just in time. Yuan told Xianzhao that this boy's name is Fan Xing, said that he had recently returned from a case ordered by the talisman. He had worked hard and rendered them a valuable service. So, he asked Xianzhao to escort the boy down the mountain. Xianzhao himself was shocked by something about the boy. He turned his attention to the bundle clutched in Fan Xing's hand. Xianzhao seemed to be glowing. He thanked his uncle and promised to definitely see brother Fan off in complete safety. Then Fan Xing intervened. He smiled and said that he could also go down himself. No need to bother big brother Xianzhao so much. Xianzhao put his hand on Fan Xing's shoulder as a sign of support, and to calm him down a bit, he, smiling gently, told the protagonist to let him escort himself out. Said the way down the mountain wasn't as safe as he thought. Xian's words actually surprised Fan Xing, because usually, in this city, everyone is cruel and indifferent. He still agreed and thanked the guy for his kindness. As they left, he and Xianzhao were talking excitedly about something, while Elder Yuan remained in the shadows, watching them. He quietly asked the boy not to blame him. Yuan was clearly either up to something or knew something. The sun was still standing still high. Xianzhao along with Fan Xing had already managed to go outside the city. They smiled warmly at each other and looked into each other's eyes. In fact, they were even somewhat alike. Soon they were at a neat staircase that led them down. They stopped and Xian pointed down with his hand. He told brother Fan to follow this road so he could return to the village where he lived. Fan Xing smiled widely at the elder, his eyes shining brightly. He thanked Xian and said that if he didn't guide him, he would definitely get lost. And he was also very grateful to Xian for the cultivation tips he shared. Xianzhao, ostentatiously downplaying his merits, waved his hand and told brother Fan that he was too polite, saying that at such a young age to successfully complete the talisman order, a great future surely awaited him, saying that it was his duty as his elder brother to help him. But he also said that he was still curious about something. Xian asked what his cultivation level was. Fan Xing smiled widely and said that he had just joined the sect, so quite low, saying that he was now at the peak of the first level of the spiritual movement. In the matter of the talisman order, he was just lucky. Xianzhao replied that the first level of spiritual advancement is indeed a low cultivation, and he was rewarded with stone essence dust for fulfilling the order of the talisman. He told him that stone essence dust is a valuable resource for those who want to ascend from the third level of spiritual advancement, so it was of no use to the boy now. Then he started to look more serious and suspicious. He asked if Fong had never thought of elevating his cultivation level. He also asked if he was going to use the 2 soul stones that the sect provided every month since he couldn't use the stone essence dust. Fan Xing replied that he couldn't do anything because he was too poor, and soul stones were only given to A-rank disciples, and his rank was too low now, so he was only given 1 stone every 3 months. After saying those words, Xianzhao placed his hands on his shoulders again. He said that there was nothing wrong with it. After all, he had a feeling that after a long conversation, there was something that connected them. He shouted that this was why he would help him. Xianzhao looked very sincere and friendly. The elder's words shocked Fan Xing more and more. A sweat of disbelief appeared on his face. He asked for help if he had heard correctly. Xian Zhao replied that yes, the stone essence dust wouldn't help him in any way even if he kept it. Fan Xing hid it more strongly in his hand. Senior Zhao asked why not Fan Xing sell it to his elder brother and get a soul stone in return. He tried to convince the boy that it was more practical for his cultivation, asking what he would say to that. Fan Xing knew very well that this was a city of evil and mean, deceitful people. Even a seemingly saintly person like Xian Zhao would be deceitful. Despite his apparent kindness, he decided that it seemed like Elder Yuan had made an exception for him to give his nephew a chance to obtain the stone essence dust. After all, even as an elder, it is not easy to take possession of resources that are strictly controlled by the sect. The main character's head was down. He was so frustrated and annoyed that they decided to take advantage of him again. Xian Zhao abruptly stopped appearing nice and radiating kindness. He bent closer to the protagonist, and looking him straight in the eyes, said that in fact, getting the stone essence dust was rare for others, but it was easy for him to get it. He said that he was just worried about his brother Fan, so he was offering him such a good deal. Then he finally climbed back up and proposed to do this. He gives Junior 30 soulstones in exchange for the stone essence dust. He said that would be quite enough. Then Fan Xing laughed and said that big brother Xian Zhao is teasing him again, although he is stupid by nature. But he knows that in the black market, the stone essence dust can be exchanged for at least 100 soulstones. After these words from the protagonist, Xian Zhao placed his heavy hand on top of him and pressed against him. The boy clutched the boy in his arms and began to choke him. Now Fan Xing couldn't even reach the floor with his feet. Xian Zhao was much bigger than him. The boy was twitching and trying to get out. Xian Zhao already told the boy in a not at all kind voice that he was in no position to bargain with him. He finally let the protagonist go, and he fell painfully on his tailbone, hitting the wooden floor hard. Next, Xian's big foot met with Fan Xing's head. The guy said that even if he killed the boy, he would just ask his uncle to cover it up by saying that he fell and died. He asked if Fan Xing realized that no one would stand up for him. Xian Zhao pressed Fan Xing's head into the parquet. He repeated again that he was only offering him 30 soul stones because he didn't want to look bad, but he didn't think he wouldn't have a conscience to treat other people's mercy like that. Fan Xing was confused. He didn't know what to do. After all, he knew that if he revealed his cultivation, the net would become suspicious of him, and family ties were also playing a role here. Fang was still lying on the floor, and Xian Zhao was standing almost on top of the boy. The protagonist struggled to raise his body on his elbows and told big brother Xian Zhao that he had behaved disrespectfully, and he could accept this dust as an apology. Xian Zhao looked at Junior Fan silently and intimidatingly. He finally took his foot off his head and let him breathe easy. The convolution was now in Xian Zhao's hand, and Fan Xing was diligently trying to catch his breath and bring himself to his normal senses. Then he looked at brother Fan kindly again and said that this wouldn't have happened if he had been obedient from the beginning. He started to leave, saying afterward not to blame him. The sect was always a place where the weak had no place. The guy was saying that Fan was weaker than him, so he deserved to be treated like this, when he was already far away. Fan Xing rose to his feet and panted at the dust and dirt. He looked after Xian Zhao for a long and silent moment. Meanwhile, Xian Zhao was calmly walking down the path back to the manor. His mood was clearly elevated now. He told himself that he finally had it. Need to thank his uncle upon his return. He spoke of the pollen of stone souls in his hand. Suddenly, his cheering was interrupted by some rustling in the bushes. Something was moving there. Unexpectedly, a sword flew at Xian Zhao. The guy was shocked. He was stunned.